Hello everyone, this is Caillou back with the gang for another set review, and today we're doing Alara. Simple name for a simple return set, but it's got a lot of depth and a lot of cool cards to offer to MSEM, so I'm excited to talk about each of those today. Firstly though, I'm going to be throwing it to Kevin, who's going to tell us about the set's general mechanics.
All right, so for Alara, we have six total mechanics, one for each color triad, and then cycling. So the first off is consume. Uh, Certain effects will ask you to consume, in which case you either sacrifice a creature or you exile a creature from your grave. This is only in gem colors. Cycling is cycling. You pay a cost, discard the card, draw a card. It's classic. Embellish, this is the Esper mechanic, and it is only found on creatures. It is an alternate cost where if you pay it, when the creature enters the battlefield, you make a 1/1 Thopter with flying.
Do note
Esper
it
also has a
also,
lot of artifact synergy, so you can consider that kind of a secondary mechanic to it.
yeah, also Embellish doesn't just need to be on creatures. There are some just pure artifacts that have it as well.
Uh, then you have Encourage, which is the Bant mechanic. It is an activated ability where you can tap the creature to give a creature +1/+1 until end of turn. You can only do this as a sorcery, so kind of an alternative to Exalt. However, many of these cards have additional effects when you encourage a creature. You have Stampede, which is the Naya mechanic, which is a triggered ability on creatures when you attack with that creature and a creature with greater power than it. Finally, there is the Grixis mechanic, Tether, which is found on instants and sorceries. It's basically like Haunt, but only for your own stuff, so when you cast it, if you cast it from your hand, you exile it as it resolves, tethered, onto a creature you control. And when that creature dies, you get a free secondary cast.
Yeah, so
And
lots of cool. Oh yeah, sorry.
those are kind of the named mechanics within the set, and also given that it's Alara, you'll see a lot of multicolored matter stuff.
Yeah, and I think that as you can see from Unearth just being free card advantage, cycling is obviously just good if it's on playable cards. Um, Stampede kind of just rewards you for curving out in aggressive decks. All of these mechanics, to some degree or another, lend themselves to having good playable constructed cards. And I think that's really
Now,
cool.
before we start, Caillou, I do have a question.
Hit
So,
me.
how do I say this? Alara has a lot of multicolored cards, in three, in some cases five colors. Would you say that MSEM has a very good mana base that lets you splash these cards with minimal effort?
Yes, but I would like to clarify. I think tricolor cards are relatively trivial to splash. Um, in MSEM, or it's relatively trivial to run tricolor decks in MSEM. Five color cards are obviously a completely different ball game, but we do have mana bases that can support five color cards. So if the right shell comes around for them, can definitely see play. I think that the thing that naturally hinders most five color cards, over and above that, is really just the presence of costing, you know,
Five
CMC
mana.
five, yeah, five mana or greater, which is a big hurdle for a format as powerful as MSCM. We do have five, we obviously have the Scions and stuff, but you really have to get your bang for your buck. And sometimes if you can do that in an easier fashion with the Scions, then you have to ask the question, why am I making the effort of going 5C for just this one card? So yeah, we'll talk about that when we get to them. But the TLDR is the mana bases for these cards exist.
Yeah, not to get derailed too drastically, but I think the thing to keep in mind when we're talking about MCM mana bases and these cards is, to me, it's weird to think basically once you've made the decision of I want to splash for this card, you sacrifice enough by choosing to splash, i.e., from going from a rock solid 2 color mana base to a 3 color one, that you may as well make it not just a splash, right? So that's the main thing to keep in mind with these cards is is this a strong enough incentive to, because the mana base will support it, it'll just have some noticeable drawbacks. Um, and you don't want to go into a color combination for literally one card. You really want to go into it for, several different tools that you'll gain access to. But without further ado, I'd love to start us off with Citadel Battle Mage because I was someone who was very high on this card. So Citadel Battle Mage is 1 and white for a 2/1 and has 2 activate abilities. It's part of a cycle. 3 and a green, search your library or graveyard for an aura card, reveal it and put it into your hand. If you search your library this way, shuffle it. 1 in blue, untap target creature. We're going to ignore that second ability. I'm sure some people could be like, oh, well, if you have a creature that taps for 3 mana, that's not where this card shines. Where this card shines is it's a 2 mana 2/1 that has a repeated card advantage activated ability. And the fact it can search through your library for any aura, whether that be a enchant land like Gila Emergence, or an enchant creature like any of our incredibly push pacifism effects. It can find curses. It can find really anything that you need it to find. We have enough playable auras. And it puts it directly into your hand. So you're drawing a card, and you're doing better than drawing a card because you're drawing a specific card every activation. But also, it can recur it from your graveyard. So if you have an aura with a active ability that requires sacrificing it, or you stick a removal aura on a creature, and then that creature dies, you can just pick it back up. It's a really mana expensive engine, and if this card doesn't get there, it's because it's too slow for the format, but I absolutely think this is powerful enough to see play.
I
Yeah.
I do have a rules question. So,
Mhm.
given that it's an and or, could you get an aura from both your library and your graveyard?
No. What that and or means is you don't have to search your library then realize, "Oh, I'm an idiot. I already milled over that one. Well, I guess I decide to start searching my library." You only ever end up finding one aura card.
Yeah, I think that I was a bit sus on this card, and I still kind of am. But when you compare it to a card like Azure Mage, it is, I think, better than Azure Mage, especially like since the third ability does provide at least some value potentially. So I think that maybe this card could get there, but I'm still not that high on it. I think 4 mana is a lot to ask. Um,
I'm also in Dodgers camp, and I think we've gone over expensive, but I think it's also the fact that it's on a creature with 1 toughness, which I think I feel like the decks which would most abuse this are kind of like control-y decks. Like I'm thinking Legend Weaving. It could also be mid-rangey to some extent, but I also think that those decks like this is just kind of like eats all the removal, dies to all the sweepers, and like, or just it presents an unimpressive threat in combat. I feel like, in general, I feel like it weakens the axes on which these like enchantment decks generally want to play on, in a
Mhm.
way that like, because like it's obviously like you're making yourself vulnerable to removal, but also the other stuff I said. Um,
Yeah, I think it's really bad in legend weaving style decks. Where I'm envisioning this is in something like just imagine a generic Abzan mid-range deck, something like Artie's Abzan Artie's. This is a early creature you can play that you can trade off if you don't need it, or it is a must answer threat versus control decks because if you get to the late game with this, you can start drowning them in cards. So if someone plays this on 2 versus me and they're in a like Abzan mid-range deck, I feel pressured to kill this before they hit 4 mana, whereupon it will have cantripped. Unless I look at their deck list and there's no auras I'm scared of, in which case they screwed up whole deck building.
fair. I guess I just feel like more scared of this on 6, where you can basically treat it as like an ETB, or like, and like if I'm thinking of early threats, I'm thinking like, okay, like why am I running this over, let's say, Purging Watchkeep or like Sack Bull or Chile? And like
I think
obviously the answer is like getting back specific card, getting a specific card. But I also think that like the fact that some or like even like Chile can like with like can generate manaless value. I think stuff like that is why I'm a little bit less high on this card.
I think I think it would be basically impossible to sell this as better than Chile. The main things this has going for it is it's not both green and black, so it's much easier to cast than Chile. It's not legendary, so you don't have to worry about it getting gummed up in your hand. And if decks like Podlight start becoming more popular, Chile lines up really badly into those decks because they usually have blockers and they can actually outsize Chile demons. Um, whereas Citadel Battle Mage actually lines up fairly well into Podlight because it allows you to hold up mana for interaction, and if you can't interact, you draw a card, and it's a good card.
Fair. Okay.
Sweet.
Okay.
I can take the next card.
Go
Sounds good.
ahead.
Cool. So the next card is Derevi's Adjutant. It is a 5 mana 4/4 flyer. When it enters the battlefield, it puts a +1/+1 counter on each other creature you control. Now the interesting part is it cycles for 2 mana, and when you cycle it, you exile it, and you can cast it from exile for as long as it's exiled this way. So the card is pretty strange because the cycle is essentially free. So it's kind of just like you can think of it almost as an adventure creature. When you look at it, because like the adventure creatures are like, okay, you can play this spell first, and then you can play the creature later. So how good is an adventure creature with this creature and then 2 mana draw a card? And my answer is probably doesn't get there in the majority of decks, I think. The only place I could maybe see it is in some kind of control deck that happens to create a lot of tokens with something like Children of the Clouds, but I'm a little unconvinced. I don't know. I know this one's been a bit controversial.
Yeah, I've mellowed out a little bit because I realize that some people are really excited about this card, so it does me no service to just, like, shit on it. But I think people are overestimating how good Cycling 2 is in this format. Cycling 2 is very far from free. Sacrificing your turn 2 or, like, not developing is kind of a big deal, and unless, as we described, you're a control deck where you're holding mana up on turn 2 and then you cycle this instead, even then what it's effectively done is it's replaced itself with a random card in your deck, but you also still have it, which is fine if you want to cast it. And I think the 5-drops in this format are so stacked that a 2-mana cantrip that draws you this card, in addition to whatever it draws you, just isn't good enough.
Okay, I know that the card I'm about to say is far better generally than Derevi's Adjutant, but I kind of want to see him like one. You know those like so true memes. I want to see like one of those where like Pip looking at Derevi's Adjutant. Cycling 2 isn't playable in this format. Pip looking at Promethean Grotto. So true.
Well, I mean,
Yeah, I mean, that's a good point. I think
No, but obviously
I-
Promethean Grotto.
yeah.
I think the
the card's
I-
very
think
different.
Promethean Grotto is a 0-drop rather than 5-drop is a big difference, but I also think it's possible that people have been sleeping really hard on Promethean Grotto.
Oh,
Myself
I think
included.
people have been sleeping hard on that.
So I'm excited to see what people do with that card in the future.
I think the biggest issue with this card personally is that in the scenario I described where you cast a big Children of the Clouds and then untap and then buff all your guys with Adjutant, you were probably going to win that game anyway. And I think that it feels a little bit win more with this card. Like I could maybe see it like as like a fun of, and but I don't know. I just don't really feel like this card is like just the numbers don't really line up to me.
Yeah.
I don't know how best to describe it.
If this was a little bit, if it had a slightly smaller body and it was a 4-drop, I would start considering it more. Like, I think this can compete with some of our 4-drop threats. This, even if it was like a 3/3, I think it could compete with our 4-drop threats. This cannot compete with Scion of Storms. And I think that's the floor. Like, we're not even getting into things like, oh, well, how does it compete with Seto-san? How does it compete with, control planeswalkers? But just literally 5 mana, here's my 8/8 vigilance worth of stats, 3/3 of it has flying, and I'm going to make more of it. Derevi's Adjutant needs to have 4 other creatures on the board to compare in terms of raw stat value, and if you have 4 other creatures, you're winning. Don't play cards that make your winning situations better.
So what you're saying is we should instead give Cycling 2 to Scion of Storms. I hear you.
I think that was what I was saying, yeah.
Okay, cool. Now that
think-
everyone's understood each other.
Also, brief thought. If Derevi's Adjutant, instead of putting a +1/+1 counter on each other creature you control, like gained 5 life on ETB, I think I would be much higher.
Oh,
on
that
it.
card would be sweet.
Because it's like a much more like I'm going to
Then it helps
control
you stabilize.
stabilize, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would.
And then then it would just be like Children of the Clouds in a single trench coat.
4 birds in a trench coat. Excellent. Let's go.
We would like 1 ticket, please.
So for perhaps one of the highest impact cards of this set, Caillou, do you want to read us Ethereum Abrogator?
Hell yeah. So it's 1 and a white for a 2/1 flyer. Okay, okay, reasonably aggressive. But then the real text that you're playing this for is non-artifact permanents entering the battlefield don't cause abilities to trigger. And this just like I was reading this and then like it kind of struck me like man, this just guts will like fickle will of a lord control, will of a fickle lord control, and it's just like oh, and then like suddenly like oh all of our scions do nothing. Hold up, and it's like you start like thinking through all of the potential use cases this card has, and it's like this is actually a really good hate bear. And I think that it kind of rounds out a suite of hate bears that we've had in the format but haven't exactly like perfectly jived before into like something which I think is like a lot more explorable in my opinion. Especially like it's a construct, so I can see Dodger salivating over there about like the lone survivor curve.
Oh, I mean, I already put 4 of it in one of my Lone Survivor decks, and I think someone net decked it and went 4-1. So
Yeah,
yeah,
I think this card is weird because just you look and you're like, okay, this is good. Like your first thought is this is good because it's a flying 2/1 that has a powerful hate bear. But it turns out when you expand from just stopping creature ETBs to stopping other stuff ETBs, it just kind of gets broken. Like I sat down when Alara was confirmed. No, it was just when it was being submitted. I looked at the GP decks and was like, okay, well this shuts off the entirety of Wanderfall. It
yeah.
shuts off everything that Podlight wants to do. It shuts off everything that Fickle Control wants to do. It hits basically all of our mid-range decks, a fair number of our aggro decks, and most of our combo decks. And every time I've run up against this card in League, I've been very glad that Podlight runs post-board like 6 to 7 different ways to answer this without using ETBs, because Jesus Christ, otherwise this card would ruin that deck's day.
Wow, yeah.
I think the funny thing that I want to talk about with this card is how last week we talked about calling Dromorix and how we mentioned that it was basically a worse version of this. But in this meta, one of the most high profile decks is the artifact combo deck, and this card does not stop that deck. And so I think we've actually been seeing like some number of Jamorix and like very few Abrogators for that reason, which I think is pretty funny.
Yeah, and I also think that's going to change come next month.
Oh
but...
yeah, 100%. Another thing I really like about this card is that you can actually build your deck so that like your own ETBs aren't affected by it. So for instance, if you're running, I think the next card on our list, yeah, it is the next card. Like that card won't get stopped by Abrogator. So you can also make the effect asymmetrical, which I think is another really big deal.
The last thing I'll point out is we talked about how the body's good and how flying is relevant. Flying is much more relevant if you lean more into equipment, which I really think more people who build aggro decks should do, because we have some really messed up equipment in this format. But curving, 1-drop into Ethereum Abrogator into turn 3 Staff of Equilibrium, equip it to Abrogator, you're going to usually run away with that game.
Oh yeah, or one of the was it swords or something? Yeah.
So you can't equip the sword on turn 3. You could do Academic Claymore, or you could go
run
for a
Armored
turn.
Clunky.
That's true. We actually do have tech to do it.
Yeah, actually, I think equipment is one of the areas that I haven't really explored that much deck building wise, so I'm excited to hopefully get to do that soon. But yeah. Should we move on?
Sounds good.
Yeah, let's do it. And you were just mentioning this next card, so do you want to talk about it, Dodger?
Yeah, so the next card is Ostracizer Orb. It is a 2-mana artifact in white, and when it enters the battlefield, you can exile target non-artifact, non-land permanent until it leaves the battlefield. So it's essentially a 2-mana Oblivion Ring with the drawback of not being able to exile artifacts, which I think is a worthy trade-off. I mean, like, you look at cards like Dissociate, which have been playable in the format before, and you are expanding the range of potential targets you can hit by quite a lot.
Oh man, that just makes me sad. I mean, I know Dissociate hasn't been like as played recently, but like, oh man, I think this just outclasses Disassociate unless you really care about the enchantment type.
Oh,
But
Which
I mean,
most of the decks
yeah.
that play Dissociate really, really did. Like, people weren't playing Dissociate just because
yeah,
they
fair.
wanted removal. It was in there because you want it to be an enchantment.
Yeah, fair.
Also, notably, we have. I think the fact this can't tag artifact creatures is kind of relevant because of the types of decks people really like to play in this format.
That's true.
I like
And
how you say
the fact
people, and we're all just like for artifact creatures, and we're all just thinking blues.
I'm
And
also
Blues isn't
thinking
even
Split
playing an
Moon.
artifact deck.
I'm thinking Split Moon cheating out artifact creatures all the time. I
That's
would
true.
love to dissociate a Platinum Colossus. I would not want to have Ostracizer Orb in my hand in that circumstance. One last thing that I think is notable here. This is a rare circumstance to come up, but the fact this can't hit land creatures could come up and would make you very sad if it did so.
In what scenario would dissociate hit land creatures? Like, I
If
guess
your
if they
opponent
activate
blocks
Monument.
with it.
Okay, yeah.
If your opponent blocks with it, or they use Blundering Clock Tower, which now activates and
Right.
through your turn is a creature.
Huh.
Not
I guess I don't really see that coming up very
Yeah.
much, but I do think that there are metas where Ostracizer Orb is not good. But I also think there are metas where this hits basically everything you want, particularly now that Intrepid is not a card that's seeing play in every deck.
Yeah. I definitely think it is a powerful tool. I also think in formats as big as this, you need to be very careful with these types of O-ring effects because people have access to main deck answers for it,
Yeah,
and giving someone a flicker on one of their creatures can be really dangerous.
definitely agree.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I would be very shocked if we saw none of this card moving forward. I think
Absolutely.
this card is
Played
good
in
and should
GP?
see. I don't actually know.
I don't think it is.
We
I
should
could be
check out Mako's handy dandy Alara stats sheet, which I think we should put up at the end of this.
I
But yeah.
considered sideboarding it in my GP deck, but I don't think I did.
Yeah, generally, I think it's fun how it works both in and or it works in the Ethereum abrogator decks, and then is also naturally checked by those. So it's like as long as I feel like the presence of each of those kind of checks each other in a fun or in like a fun weird way.
Yeah, I agree with that assessment.
Hmm. Okay, and I think with that, we're done with white.
Oh, we do have one more.
No,
We removed the other white card from the list.
Okay,
yeah,
got rid of
we
that.
do.
Okay.
Yeah. So the next up is a personal favorite of mine from drafting the set. It's Disturb the Riddlegate. So we have well, starting off, it has Cycling 2, which, as we all know, makes the card basically unbeatable. But its base cost is 2 and a blue, and it says mill 5 cards, and then put any number of cards with Cycling from among the milled cards into your hand. So, again, I think there are like lots of incidentally powerful cards which have cycling both in this set and in others in MSEM. That I could definitely see this being played as like 3 mana. If you're playing to maximize this, like as a 3 mana draw 5, I think this could, or like 4. This could be a really strong card. I'm not sure exactly what that shell would look like, or if we have the density of good cycling cards in the right colors for this to be playable yet. But I think it's definitely a card to keep an eye on for brews in the future.
So I have built a deck with this card. I think there is a very good package of cycling cards that work together very well. Um, we'll talk about them more as we go on, but those cards are Unearth, this card, and Arcanist Reaver. I think all three of those cards fit very well into the same deck. And I think there's plenty of other cycling cards that you could potentially run in this kind of shell too. I also think that the fact that we have cycling lands means that you can also increase the number of hits that you get from this. And you can also build your deck so that like the fact that you're milling cards can also be an advantage.
So I'm gonna push back a little bit because I just kind of sat down and ran the numbers. So this card isn't very good if it's only drawing you 2 cards, right? Like
Agreed.
you need to be hitting 3 cards before this card starts getting good. To hit the point where you're at better than 50% chance to do so, you need to be running over 30 cards with cycling in your deck. That's a lot.
Yeah, that is pretty tough.
And even once you get up to 40, you're at a little bit under an 80% chance to draw at least 3 cards. You can still whiff when you have 40 cyclers in your deck. So
I think
that's a really rough sell.
so. I think The pushback I would give is that you can run a certain number of cycling duels in your deck,
Mhm.
as well as cards like Promethean Grotto.
Oh,
Um,
absolutely. But
and
those
that will allow you to hit that number easier. Plus, you can build your deck in a way so that you can like gain advantage of the fact like maybe you're playing 3 mana, draw 2, mill 3, and like that's still a fine like you can build your deck so that you can take advantage of the graveyard as well. Yeah,
yeah, and I think yeah, I think notably you can't run too many cycling duels because they're all tapped at lands,
right.
and if you're playing 3 colors, it's a really big sell to say I want to run, more than one copy of Promethean Grotto because, good luck having all of your color requirements.
Yeah,
But
agreed.
it's a very powerful card if you can line up the circumstances right. I was just curious and realized, oh wow, these circumstances are way harder to line up right than I thought.
I
Because
think it presents a very interesting deck building challenge,
mhm,
and I think that that challenge is probably harder than it first appears, as you said.
yeah.
Um, yeah, sweet.
Next one's a real quick one. We have Ethereum Sculptor, which is a reprint from Canon Alara. So it's a 1/2 for 2 mana. Artifact spells you cast cost 1 less to cast. Notably, we already have artifact discount things that aren't creatures, so I don't think Crazy Train would play Ethereum Sculptor, for instance.
Yeah, no worries.
But this is still a cool card to have. I have loved playing it in EDH, and maybe something will pop up where this feels great, but I somewhat doubt it.
Yeah, I think the only thing I want to say about this card is as soon as I saw that this was reprinted, I was like, oh, that's fitting.
Yeah,
Like if
yeah.
there were any cards reprinted from the original shards, this would be like in the top 5. I don't know. It just feels so iconic to me.
And I love the new flavor text on it, referencing the Sangrite Crusade on Jund, which I think
Oh
is a
yeah,
central thing about the new world of the merged shards.
for sure. Yeah. Cool. Next card.
Ooh.
All right, it's Filigree Lotus. It is a 4 mana blue artifact. It has tap, add 3 mana in any combination of colors. Spend this mana only to cast artifact spells or activate abilities of artifacts. So this card is already seeing play in a couple different decks, I think, in Crazy Train and in the kind of blue-red artifact combo deck. The fact that it costs 4 mana but immediately gives you 3 mana back makes it very, very powerful, especially in decks like Crazy Chain, which can discount the mana cost and make this essentially free to cast.
Filigree Lotus is currently only seeing play in Crazy Train. The blue-red decks aren't running it.
Oh, okay. Did they cut it? I definitely remember.
Yeah.
I remember Splatoon casting against me in League, but I guess
It's also possible it was in Infinity Chef's list that was meant to be playable entirely within TUC.
Oh, okay, maybe. Yeah, I'm not sure.
But yeah, Filigree Lotus is so I was talking with Simon, and he mentioned that he originally recommended Crush to test before this GP. Crush was like, it looks a little bit expensive, but I'll see. And then like a couple hours later, message Simon back, I think this card broke the deck. And Crazy Train is a deck that has been slowly and steadily getting closer and closer to top 8 for the past few GPs. Crush has really been putting in the hours to continue tuning the deck and playing it better and better and better. So he won his first round. I would not be shocked if Filigree Lotus helped that deck go the distance.
Yeah, I commentated that match. Filigree Lotus was pretty nuts. I remember a particular one where cast it and immediately copied it with I forget the name. It's like it's the artifact that can copy a non-creature artifact for 2 mana.
It's like flawless counterfeit.
Flawless counterfeit, yeah. So like by doing so, Crush immediately ramped themselves like 4 mana because the Filigree Lotus was already discounted by 2, and I was just like, wow, that is quite gross. So yeah, I think even the case where you're casting this for 4 mana, it is honestly it costs 1 net mana to cast it if you immediately cast the artifact, and then on your next turn you untap yours up +3. Like that's actually such an insane line for me, and I feel like this card is very good and will see play in a lot more decks. particularly if you're doing something with 11th Hour Breakthrough too. That's another really good use case for this card.
Oh yeah, that.
So yeah, I think this card's super underrated.
I think the main issue is the fact you can only cast artifacts out of it really limits the amount of value you can get out of it. But I also think that if that's a non-factor, if you're already running a bunch of artifacts and you're already in blue and you want to ramp, yes, you should run this. I think it's a very simple, like, you'll know if you want it, and
Yeah,
I
yeah.
don't think it is the card that makes you play that deck.
Oh yeah, like I wouldn't put this in like 11th Hour Breakthrough, but I think that there is probably a deck where you're playing this and you also want 11th Hour Breakthrough as one of your few non-artifact cards. If that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
All right, should we move on?
Yeah, that's pretty thoroughly discussed. And I think the next card is one that Pip should start us off on because she had a choice reason to run this card. So, you want to take it away?
Yeah, so this upcoming card is Sphinx Paramount. So for 5 mana, it's a really expensive card. However, it also provides a very specific type of hate. So the initial thing you'll think is, oh wow, this card's really gross with Cyclonic Rift, and it absolutely is. This card, when played alongside Cyclonic Rift, should get you banned from most local game stores. But MSEM used to, still kind of does, have a deck around bouncing creatures to your own hand. And if you resolve this, somehow, Suzume effectively can no longer activate abilities. I'm not sure in which world this is true, but if you have some way to flash this out, like you decide you have Witch's Invocation, you're really going to get them. If you flash this out in response to a Suzume activation, I think it's really hard to lose from there.
Can't they just name a different creature name than one they control, though?
No, because naming is part of the cost. Yep.
Oh, it's part of the cost. Okay, never mind. Yeah. I mean, to be honest, that feels like kind of a very niche hate piece as opposed to just running cheap removal for the Suzume.
Or you could run Sorcerer's Spyglass, since they're not going to intentionally activate Suzume afterwards. But this card is still absolutely hilarious and can do some really busted things.
In EDH, I'm looking forward to running this with the Long Journey plus the one revelation that does a Cyclonic Rift to your opponents. I think in EDH, I think that's a very achievable game state and one that I hope to have one day.
Also, I think most local game stores would ban you for playing MSCM cards because they're not actual cards.
I mean, okay, I'm going to be real with you. Alara is so well done that you think they'd be able to tell? We'd just be like, what, you missed the release? Psh, pleb. And then they would, like, what are they going to do? They're going to question the legitimacy of this fine card over here?
So, the next card is on here because of a clerical error. And unfortunately, it's a clerical error that I would not be shocked if it won the GP. So we have Supreme Mechanothurge, a 5-drop 3/3 artifact creature. You may have each other artifact you control enter the battlefield as a copy of any artifact or creature you control, except as it's an artifact in addition to its other types. Mako was like, oh yeah, no, this is fine because Embellish has an intervening if clause. You have to cast it for if Embellish costs before this does anything. Forgetting that for the rest of us, we have tokens that are created on ETB on occasion. And it turns out that Alara actually has one of those. So someone got infinite comboed in Limited recently, which...
That someone was me.
Okay. Not a great look, I will say.
So I think the combo that's most known with this card is this card plus Unity Spheres. If you have Mechanothurge in play, cast Unity Spheres, and Unity Spheres will enter the battlefield. You can make 2 more 1/1 artifact creatures and have the battlefield as a copy of Unity Spheres, and then just do whatever you want from then, so on and so forth.
Yeah, it's just like, and even outside of the combo, if you can land some big copy-worthy target, you can kind of just go ham with this. Like, I was playing a GP game versus Chef, who was running this deck, and he never actually did the infinite combo. He just ramped up into this plus a Facsimile of Divinity, and then just started playing Artifact, and it was like, hold on here.
Yeah, well, not even that. Like, this plus citywide automation. Like that just turns citywide automation into 2 mana, make 6 power.
I mean, let's be real here, though. If that was a real concern, Timus would be a playable card.
That's true. Yeah.
Fair,
I
Like,
think.
but I
I
think
don't
I
think
think
there's a real
what makes
card
it
outside the
powerful is the
icon.
fact that we have strong artifact acceleration plus the combo. So I think the idea is that like even if you don't get the combo, you can kind of just use this as a one card combo or one card used in big quotations. But the combination in our current format of reinvent plus Tinker's Tools as tutors plus 11th Hour and the rail lines as ramp pieces is kind of like the perfect perfect storm makes it sound like a negative, but the perfect storm for like this kind of like fair artifact deck that can also oopsie into this combo with a 5 mana piece, no less.
yeah. Notably, I think I think the tools exist in MSEM to combat this deck, but I also don't think that this is necessarily a deck that people should be expected to combat because it won't be legal in the long term. It's something that the rework of this card is also fairly exciting. It's whenever an artifact enters the battlefield under your control, on artifact fall, basically, artifact constellation. You can have it become a copy of any artifact or creature you control. Still very versatile, but
Huh.
no longer self-infinites. So
Okay, so you can't copy the ETBs basically.
exactly. So the
Yeah.
citywide automation thing still works. And I think we will see the card is not playable.
Yeah, I don't think this is a real card without the infinite combo. To be honest. I
Yeah,
think.
otherwise it's just a curiosity, but still a cool card. But yeah.
I think it's cool that there's decks that able, um, and that you can have games where this comes down, and you don't do the you can still win. But
Hmm.
you would not basically like include this in a deck unless you had that I would.
Mm-hmm. And yeah, moving on to I think unless anyone else has something to mention.
No, you were talking about cool cards. I think this is.
Okay.
This card isn't cool, but it does its job.
Yeah. I think we've been on an artifact streak, so let's keep that up. Terraformer's Globe. So you might be looking at this and saying, Caillou, is that just Arkham's Astrolabe except blue? And I would be like, why, yes, it is Arkham's Astrolabe except blue. Um, and I think, funnily enough, it has kind of had not as big an impact as one might expect given its presence in other formats. But I think that's due to a combination of factors. I think Pip can elaborate on the other, which is related to its canon presence. But I also think it's just like MSEM's mana bases are generally good, and while we probably aren't pushing them to their exact limits, at which point maybe this would be valuable, we can get away with most of the stuff. Like we can get away with up to like as we mentioned earlier, 3 color plus splash or even 4 color, with kind of just the stuff that we have already. So Terraformer's Globe being an astrolabe is powerful, but it's also something that like isn't as crazy as it might be for some other formats. And Pip can mention the canon comparison.
Yeah. So there's a couple of different things involved. One, and I'm not going to get too canon on us because this is not a canon podcast ultimately, but people frequently forget that Arkham's Astrolabe wasn't actually a big deal in most canon formats until it hit critical amounts of synergy. So Pauper is different because Pauper is largely defined by having bad mana. Once you break the restriction of bad mana, Pauper kind of implodes. Because then you get to just play these greed piles that otherwise could not exist and be competitive. Um, but in both Legacy and Modern, Arkham's Astrolabe really underperformed, except in Urza decks, where it being a cheap artifact that replaced itself was relevant, um, until the addition of Oko. Because Oko meant the fact that you were running these 4 dead cards in your deck come the late game not be an issue, because it was actually a 3/3 elk, which could kill your opponent. And we've seen that build up over and over again in Modern until it got banned. And in Legacy, the format's basically kept in check by the incredible power of non-basic hate in the format. So the fact that right now the only playable Blood Moon deck in the format is actually a 5-color Arkham's Astrolabe deck is a little bit concerning. Um, in MSEM, however, we don't have a lot of those same factors. Your Arkham's Astrolabes, or sorry, your Terraform's Globes aren't going to turn into threats in the mid game. We already have good mana. I know both Hersey and myself built 5-color control decks with Terraform's Globe at the start of this season. Both of us, after one run, cut Terraformer's Globe from our decks because we didn't need the fixing help and the card was just a dead card. Again, to reiterate, we built 5-color control decks and then realized, this card's just kind of doing nothing other than fixing, we don't need it. So I think the only decks that really want this are ones which really care about it being an artifact, or have ways to repeatedly flicker or bounce it, or otherwise abuse the fact that you can turn it into a card advantage engine effectively.
I will say
Yeah,
though,
and I
in
think there are plenty of those decks.
Yeah. I was initially brewing a Tanager Typhoon deck that looked like it'd be awesome with this card,
Mhm.
but I didn't end up finishing it for a variety of reasons.
I did 5-0. Sorry, I did 5-0 a league with this card. It was blue-red Fateful Eruption, and this was actually very, very good in the deck. The deck wanted artifacts to sack to breakthrough. It wanted to sacrifice to Fateful Eruption, and B, it also wanted to run a bunch of these colorless lands that help the strategy, like Chrismite Wall and running meant you could get away with running all these colorless lands and then also casting Dragon Gate. So I think that this card just does a lot of really cute stuff. Enough rate that it is actually good, but not overrated. So I think that it has overall been a very nice addition to the format, and I'm excited to see how it enables future strategies going forward.
And what I was gonna say before we moved on was just that like, if you're playing an Alara draft though, this card is absolutely a house.
Oh yeah, of course.
No.
Any...
No, I'm just mentioning it because like I've played a decent amount of, or like not played, but I've done a decent amount of Alara drafts in my time. It's one of my favorite custom draft formats, and people always let this card go way too early, like way too early, or like sorry, let it go too late, and I'm just like, what? Like, I'm over here like taking this like within like first 3 picks sometimes. Like you go bomb this, and then you're like, cool, but yeah, just like the set already has like a lot of artifacts energies and like fixing, and being base blue is not that hard given how many good blue cards are on the set. So yeah, if you're doing a draft of this, which I think we'll be hosting draft events of the set going forward, prioritize this card higher, people. It's real good.
We already did do one too, right?
Yeah, we've done
this
so far.
card.
I will say for my, I did not see a single copy of this card when I drafted.
Like,
although I drafted red green aggro, so I don't think I would have picked it.
That's the thing, is the second you're in anything slower, or you're like there's no bombs or whatever in your pack, like fixing's good and limited. This is one of those things that's known. And the fact this leaves an artifact around feels like it would kind of be a no-brainer. So I'm mildly perturbed by how people draft.
Yeah, no, it's wheeled for me a few times, and I've been like, Lord.
What on God's green earth? All right. Anyway, now we spilled nothing on this blue 1-drop that draws cards. Let's talk about another blue 1-drop that draws cards. Dodger, why don't you take it away?
Okay, so this is a pet card. I think this is actually the best encouraged feature of the set. It's Unbold Navigator. It's a 1-mana 1/1 blue. It has encouraged, and then whenever a creature that you encouraged deals combat damage to a player, you draw a card. So basically, it's the Saboteur effect to creatures that you encourage with this. I think that when you're running a very limited tempo deck with like a potentially a couple cheap threats, and this can actually do a very good Curious Obsession impression, which, as we all know, that card is pretty stupid. And I think that the fact that it's also a threat and can attack, pressure the opponent's life total. If you do them in multiples, one of them can buff the other. I just think that like for 1 mana, you are actually getting a quite decent amount of value for an aggressive curve tempo. I'm not convinced that the strategy is efficient enough for MSEM, but I think it's at least interesting. I'd like to play with it.
Yeah, I think ultimately my biggest issue with Unbeholden Navigator is it's kind of slow. So the thing about Curious Obsession is you can go, here's my 1-drop threat. On turn 2, I put a Curious Obsession on it, I swing, I draw a card, I still have 1 mana left over to play with, which I
Right.
can use to defend my creature or whatever. Unbeholden Navigator is functionally not online until either A, turn 3, or B, turn 2 if you have a haste creature, which is just kind of a specific circumstance that you'll need to enable it,
Yeah,
which I think is
yeah,
going to hurt.
yeah. I think that delay just puts you. It's a bit too slow to be really.
So I agree with that. I think that what is the advantage over Curious Obsession is your opponent removes a creature with the removal spell, you still have that encourage effect to put on your next threat.
Yep.
So that like you don't have to just protect one threat. And then if they want to get rid of the Navigator, well, they didn't actually kill your creatures, keep beating them down.
Yeah.
So I think there are advantages as well as downsides.
Yeah, I think most aggressive strategies where you need to stick multiple creatures on the battlefield, and realistically more than one of them has 1 toughness, those sorts of strategies have a really uphill battle to fight. But I think like the ceiling of this card is obviously nuts, and I'm a big proponent of put blue cards in your deck, so I'm not going to be down on this card.
By Primordial Manifestation from Scriptures of Urshad, and I think this is probably the best enabler for it. So I did throw together a little deck to try to run both of them. I haven't, but I'm guessing it's probably like a 2 league deck. I don't know. We'll see how it goes.
Okay, wait, I have a really good take.
Okay,
So, if you have 2 creatures with this, you can start drawing cards.
sure.
But if you have 3 creatures and a pair of pools, you can also start drawing cards instead. So clearly, just play pair pools instead of this card.
I've been lawyered. God damn it.
Gets them every time.
Yeah, I can't disagree with the purple still.
Alright, on to Black, and we are continuing our theme of cards that draw cards.
Oh,
It's
I
the
love
best thing
this
to do in
one.
Magic.
Apparently.
So this is Bloodbraid Ritualist. A bear with black, discard a card, it gains indestructible until end of turn, tap it. And at the beginning of your upkeep, you can consume, which is basically the mechanic we talked about earlier, sacrifice a creature or exile a creature card from your graveyard to draw a card. So basically a Bob riff.
Tapping isn't a cost.
Huh?
Sorry, that tapping isn't a cost. Sorry, I love this card so much.
Oh yeah.
Right, I mean, the tapping is rarely a cost with this sorts of thing. Like, Undercity Lich, I think, was one of the first ones we got that did this sort of templating. It's the new regeneration. TM.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's like if you can consistently enable this, which like yeah, obviously if you can consistently enable this, it's just better Bob, which hey, I think that pays a lot of dividends. The problem, of course, is being able to go, okay, play this, untap immediately, draw a card off of it. In which case, you need to do like a cantrip on turn 1, Oracle's Vision, or you need to have like a Torment land to discard something. So I think it's still like a really powerful like mid-rangey card. It's just like it's not like an auto include in
Or like a 1-drop, like the what is it? The Temin pack into this is
Menin Impact, yeah.
Menin
That's
impact.
pretty good.
Yeah.
Yeah, like
So-
Hard to work. One
I think-
is, okay.
Sorry, you go ahead.
Okay. One is kind of your like reset style, very low curve, lots of creatures, creatures with death triggers, blood artifacts, and stuff like that. I think the card is great in those decks. The other strategy, which is one that I actually put it in, was a Esper tokens list. So kind of like a range deck that already wanted to run 2-drops because it was playing Theocracy, and then it also had a lot of ways to make tokens with cards like Centered Acolyte and Union Rail Strikebreaker. So being able to just stack those tokens off cards is another use for this card. And the fact that it has built-in protection from removal is also kind of sick, honestly. No other mob can protect itself from removal spells repeatedly.
So I think my main issue with this card is what both of you guys are describing, which is I don't actually want this card to be a once per turn sacrifice a creature to draw card. I think that isn't where I want to be in MSEM, just because Autumnal Watch exists and is a really messed up card. That should not be a 1-drop, but that's beside the point. Bloodbraid Ritualist to me stands out not as a 2-drop that you're playing on curve, but as the 2-drop you play when the dust has settled, and you've 1-for-1 your opponent a bunch, you've milled over some stuff, or you've just traded creatures, and then this starts drawing cards off of your creatures in graveyard. I think my main issue with Bloodbraid Ritualist, that name is going to trip me up so many times, is it's weird to compare Bob variants because the comparisons are never direct. Everyone has their own different deck building restrictions and such, but I think Imperial Confidant is generally better. The fact that this can gain indestructible is neat, but also the fact that you're discarding card means it's not like your opponent's removal is still 1-for-1ing. It's not immune to any of our exiles, any of our talks, any of our edicts, and it's also not a big body, so it's not like it gaining indestructible means you can actually trade with other creatures in combat. And I think Imperial Confidant is enabled more easily just by playing good cards, and has fewer circumstances or fewer stages of the game where it's not live. I would not be shocked if someone rocked up with a good Bloodbraid Ritualist list, but I also suspect this card is a lot clunkier than it looks at first glance.
I kind of disagree. I feel like the deck building restrictions on Imperial Confidant can be pretty annoying. And I think that, honestly, just playing a lot of creatures and ways to get them into the graveyard, at least to me, I don't know.
To be fair, we have seen what do you call it? Like the kind of Wealth of the Underbrush plus Chief Striking Dawn style decks do that. But I think also the thing is like you have to measure like how much are you willing to use creatures in your graveyard as fodder
versus recurring them.
Yeah, versus recurring them. And so I think that's where you kind of get into the bind of like you want to be in a deck that gets creatures in the graveyard but also wants this additional hoop of like, yeah, no, you can just keep them there. I'm cool with them just chilling.
I think where this card really shines is, maybe post-board in a aggressively slanted, like, red-black X deck or green-black X deck, where, post-board you bring it in, and it can eat removal spells that your opponent has boarded in, and also it is one of those things, like, when they finally think they've killed you, you land this and you start, removing your 1-mana 2/2s, or the other cards you don't care about anymore.
Sure, yeah.
Alright, speaking of graveyard value, you might notice some themes. Blue, we talked a lot about artifacts. Black, it's going to shock you, is going to involve a lot of graveyard value. So, Dragscape Chant is 3 and a black, sorcery. Return up to 1 target creature card from your graveyard to the battlefield tapped. You gain 2 life. Tether. So, Chant is really interesting. I think it's one of our best fair reanimation spells that we've ever printed. The fact that it can potentially, for 4 mana, get you back 2 creatures is huge. And the fact that even though the creature comes back tapped, it gains you life, means that it kind of offsets the, downside of, oh, well, this is incredibly clunky, what I just did. You can tether it onto the same creature, so that when that creature dies, it just comes back a second time. Or you can tether onto another thing, something maybe sacrificable, and just ditch that one. And then you can instead recur a second thing. I think Dragscape Chant is interesting, but also inherently a very slow card, and you'll need to find... It can kind of do a I think it occupies a very similar slot to Tradition, as we discussed in Scriptures of Urshad, where it's the sort of thing you do in a grindy mid-range deck in order to basically go over the top of your opponent.
I think that this card is very, very interesting for not just Reanimator decks, but also, like, it can be a fair card in many of these decks that are kind of like Reanimator, like the Green Striking Dawn lists. I believe the one deck that's playing it in the GP is Ruben's Master Reanimator combo deck, which I actually had the pleasure of playing against in round 1. I talked with Ruben a little bit after we finished the match, and the rationale for including it in the sideboard was basically against decks that their main plan is to use creature destruction and removal against you. Reanimator combo from going off. If you, like, as you said, Pip, if you cast Direct Save Chant on a creature and they kill it in response to you getting your Vivid Mirage, well, you can just get the Spellmaster back and try again, like, immediately. So
Mhm.
it's kind of like one removal spell. Um,
Yeah, it's also really
and
good. Like we have constant conjuring, but then being immune to non-creature permanent removal as well is kind of a boon when we have stuff like Journey's End now buffed and Demon Worthy, obviously. So constant conjuring does provide that same like uh, removal protection, while though it isn't instant. Um, I think being a non-permanent is actually an advantage in some of those cases. Of course, there also
well, this
are
card
also
doesn't protect
disadvantages.
you against
Huh?
Journey's End because they can just Journey's End the creature.
Huh?
Yeah.
What do you say?
This card doesn't protect you against Journey's End because they can just end the creature.
Yeah. Okay. Fair.
Uh,
I just. Yeah.
yeah.
It's better against Pith Wilt, if they are a
That's
deck that can Pith Wilt for 4, which is non-trivial. Um,
True.
I think this card, and Constant Conjuring as well, maybe, deserves to be explored more in mid-range builds, and it's just,
Yep.
a shame that I haven't been playing mid-range decks that are interested in this sort of effect yet.
I think the Striking Dawn deck eats this up personally.
Yeah, I think that's probably fair.
I think the reason that you wouldn't run this in the Striking Dawn decks over Constant Conjuring is the inability to be recurred by Wealth of the Underbrush, because you can sometimes just go Wealth of the Underbrush, mill like 2 Reanimator targets and Constant Conjuring, get back the same Constant Conjuring with that Wealth of the Underbrush, and then go off.
Notably, Chief
That's fair, I
Striking
guess.
Dawn can also reanimate Constant Conjuring.
Yeah. Okay,
Not
so there are
sure
definitely
why you would.
Yeah, but then at that point, you just reanimate the actual thing. Okay.
Okay, I
So
think we've talked about this one for good enough.
yeah, sure. Kevin, do you want to start us off in the next one?
Oh yeah, Extenuate. So, Extenuate, 1 black instant, destroy target creature who's basically symmetrical, whose power and toughness are equal. I'd have to go over like the creatures we have, but I'm pretty sure like basically every creature in the format has equal power toughness, or at least like 80% or so.
I wouldn't say basically every.
It
Like
misses a lot
we
more than
just
you
saw
think.
Ethereum Abrogator, which doesn't cover that. So that's like one, and I think that there are a bunch of like Chile doesn't get hit by this, and that's only
Heart
thing
of
you
the
have two.
Deadwood gets missed.
Yeah, that's only thing you have two ones.
Well,
Yeah.
I think you need to think what creatures that you most want to kill, and think what percentage of those get killed by this. It's definitely like it's not it's a small number. Like it is probably over 50%. The question is what percentage? At what percentage is this card a playable card
Mm-hmm.
compared to
So,
the other
just doing a
playable cards?
quick check on Instigator.
So
Of
the
the
question.
creatures that are
Mm-hmm.
listed as staples, it hits 13.
And how many does it miss? Because that's the more relevant number. Like, is
Or
staple?
it
Uh,
misses 15 creatures.
to see that
Yeah, not even
that
50%.
worries me a
That's
lot.
rough.
Yeah.
And looking at the new cards that just entered the format, like Hellion Devastator, which we'll get to later, it misses that. Sanjin misses it.
It hits Deep Dweller.
It
It hits
hits
Earthbreaker.
it hits Earthbreaker. It misses Ruin Delver, which is starting to see more play. Um,
Yeah.
it misses. It misses the 2/1 Menace, Avatar of Basalt. It hits the rest of Burn's creatures, but also trading 2 mana for a burn creature is not really where you want to be. It misses Inish 2 before it flips, and you really want to hit Inish 2 before it flips.
Yeah. Hitting Umber to Goliath is nice though.
Yeah, it definitely hits things. The main question for every single removal spell is just it's always format contextual, and we have some good competition in the realm of 2 mana removal spells.
Yeah, like I guess I feel like Soul Leak is usually going to be better than this.
Yeah, the circumstances where you want this over Soul Leak are specifically you are a deck that's planning on going until like turn 7 or 8,
Yeah.
where your opponent will start being able to dodge Soul Leak. And in those circumstances, I am playing a deck where I want my removal to never be conditional, unless I am playing a deck with so much card selection that I can afford to play cards that will miss some amount of time because I can just, shuffle them back in. But until we make Brainstorm legal in this format, as we deserve, I don't think that's going to happen.
Yeah, I think I'm pretty low on this card. Unless I have like my big brew innovation moment where I like, hey, like 90% of creatures permanently are killed by this, and then I feel like a genius. But I mean, it's a nice card. Like it's cool. I just don't think that MSEM, given like the removal options we have that hit like much wider swaths of creatures, this is really ever going to get there. At least in the current.
One day, 2 mana black removal spell. One day. Yeah,
All right.
speaking about 2 mana black cards, next up is Obscene Recitation. So this one is unfortunately a sorcery, or fortunately, depending on your definition. And it's just target opponent exiles a card from their hand, scry 2, but it has tether. So it's basically 2 mana mind rot, except you get to exile them and you get to scry 4. Wowza.
Well, there's a really specific thing about Mind Rot, which is you spend 1 mana, or sorry, you spend 1 card for 2 cards. Whereas Obscene Recitation is kind of, if you're planning on just sacking a creature to immediately proc it, you're spending 2 cards for 2 cards.
Okay, but
Which-
see what you do
There are
is
plenty of-
you
There are
play.
plenty of decks where you can sack creatures for value. You
Oh,
can sack
Yeah, yeah.
absolutely.
So you play a
Right,
turn. You
you
play a
play-
turn
you
1
play
Departed
many
Evangel. You play this turn 2. Then turn 3, you sacrifice it to an Autumnal Watch, and then you actually go +1 card. So you see.
Right.
No,
Also-
you break up
also
the
would like to point
agonizing
out-
punishment here.
I think this is better than Agonizing Punishment by a bit.
I agree. Although they could go in the same deck.
Oh
Very
god.
easily.
Don't this
Why not?
unofficial podcast does not condone people playing Agonizing Punishment.
Like literally, why
do.
not? Hey, I went through on a CNN with agonizing punishment. I mean,
Okay, we are not going. We're not getting into Agonizing Punishment discourse.
This sort of discourse happens every single time, but no, Agonizing Punishment is a bad card. People should stop running it. Literally just sit down and do the math. It sucks. But the Scry 2 on this card is super real. The Scry 2 is the point where it starts getting really close to draw card. And as much as I was kind of memeing about, oh man, this isn't even card advantage, Scry 2 starts to make it much closer to that. Especially when you are looking at a deck that isn't usually drawing too many cards, which is where Scry really stacks up. Exiling is also not nothing. Like, they can't just pitch a win con they're going to pick up later. But it also, they're choosing the cards. So, I think this card's a mixed bag. It's worth building around, and exploring and pushing to its limits, but not sure otherwise.
I would also like to point out you can cast this on people's draw steps with sacrifice outlets.
You can get
take that for
one of
two-
them.
Yeah.
Like, it's good if-
one.
Yeah, it's good if your opponent is down to 0 cards in hand, is the thing.
Yeah.
Because
I think there are good synergy engines where this card shines.
Mhm.
Format. And I think that it's powerful enough that I feel in those shells. I don't know if it actually gets there, but I think it's definitely worth looking at.
It's also, I would consider putting it in a couple of decks where you're not planning on trying to maximize synergy with sack outlets, and just see how it plays if it's kind of this rattlesnake.
Yeah.
I suspect it will be bad in those circumstances, but I'd be interested in seeing that just to kind of get a sense of the highs and lows of it.
I'm guessing it's weak in those decks too.
All right.
Next
So-
up, I think, can I just
Yeah.
say, that Profane Emissary, I think, takes the spot for the most card of this set.
It's definitely the most talked about.
Most
like,
is
the card
definitely
you look at-
that's a bar to pass, but I think it's one of the most fun cards in the set for sure.
Yeah, it's just like you look at this and you just like tilt your head like, oh, what?
1-800, get yourself a demon.
So this card is definitely balanced around the assumption that demons cost somewhere in the 4 to 7 range. What this card was not balanced with the assumption of is that your 1 drop could be a demon, or
Or
even your land could be a demon.
Oh,
What if you're a demon? So
Oh.
what if your opponent's a demon? What if we're all just demons?
I think that the draw mode of this, finding copies of polyp pools, is not very relevant. And when people were talking about that, I was like, okay, well, if my opponent does that, I'm going to just kill them. It's fine. But I do think the fact that this card, more likely than not, in the decks that want it, looks like a 4/4 lifelink is is good. I would say is our best Goif, but Initiative just entered the format. Um,
Yeah, an issue. Oh man, I have
um,
that guy on my GP deck. Oh, man.
Cajun has
Okay.
been making a lot of headway with this card in the kind of Dragon Reanimator control deck that already wanted to run Pulp Pools. I think it's actually a really good fit into that deck because it's not requiring you run cards you wouldn't otherwise want to run already. It's just kind of taking advantage of a different overlapping tribal synergy.
So
Um,
doing a quick check, it looks like Skyrim actually might be what makes this work because it added 3 different very good low cost demons. So
Yeah, I think
Those are fine, but I think
Knight
you
of
can
Order.
honestly get away with running like you can run this as like a 4/4 lifelink with just polyp pools and maybe an expedition post. Like I really think that like using this to tutor up a polyp pools, like just use it for like just tutor up one polyp pools on one draw step and suddenly it's a 4/4 lifelink. It's just really good. And like unless you're really digging for some specific card in your deck, I think you're fine taking one draw step off to get a land.
yeah, I think it super depends, but I think that this card is a worse toolbox card than it is just a beater. I think it's fine if it toolboxes, but I think if you're running this to try and toolbox, something has gone wrong, most likely.
Yeah,
But that
it's
might
not
be
like you're
incorrect.
running it. I don't think you're running it to be a toolbox card, but the fact that it can, like, if you do want to take a card from your opponent's hand, you can choose to draw a Knight of Order on turn 3. Like
Well,
that is not trivial.
if you're choosing to run Knight of Order, like that's the real cost there. Is would you have wanted to run that?
Knight of Order is not a bad
It's
card.
it's a fine card.
Knight of
Would
Honor
you
is an
have
okay
wanted?
card.
Would you have wanted to run it in your deck if not for this card? And
I
the answer is
literally
probably
have
not.
4 Knight of Order in GP.
Okay, but you're a Dodger. Like, it's in the same way that I'm not going around saying, it's totally fine because I play 5 color decks. That means 5 color decks are perfectly, overpowered. It's like, no, it's
Okay,
sometimes player skill
let's
overrides card
let's look at the data
evaluation
here.
skill.
Let's look at the data here. I am undefeated in the GP.
Uh huh.
You are not.
True.
Four
How
Knight of
many
Order in my
other
sideboard.
people?
Not.
How many other people? I actually, we can
Okay,
quickly
wait.
check.
Let's just talk about Knight of Order itself. I think it's a good card. I think the ability to kind of just be a creature that functions as hand attack is fine. 3 mana is a little expensive. It's no kite sail because it doesn't have evasion. Um, and I think that sometimes they can't cast spells of that same name can be relevant because if you're just grabbing a combo piece and they don't have interaction, they're just like turbo combo. It's good. In general, though, again, I think I
Joker.
agree with Pip that like you would you play this if it didn't have the +2/+2 and gains lifelink? And I think
Like
the answer is
that is by
Absolutely
far the
not.
best part about this card.
Yeah,
yeah,
that's
exactly.
the mode.
And I think that's the thing. Like I think that's what Pip is saying. Like if you're playing this because it is a beater, and you can incidentally sometimes maybe do toolboxy stuff with it. But if you're playing it for the toolbox above the beater, something has gone very wrong. Reevaluate what you're doing.
Right. I think when you see that second mode, you look and think, what toolbox cards should I add to my deck to make this powerful? And I think
Yeah.
the answer is you shouldn't. I think unless you're a deck that already wanted Native Order, don't add it to your deck. Also, I just checked; it has a 30% win rate over 10 games so far. Native
What
Order.
does Knight of Order?
Native Order.
Mm-hmm.
We'll have to bring that up then.
Um,
Yeah, what's his GP win rate, huh?
yeah.
Huh?
Currently 0 because guess what? We don't track those yet.
Ah, shit.
Also, I'm pretty sure it's like one game because if I remember Crow's record, that GP, I may be wrong though.
No,
Alright,
I was saying this GP, but you're right. You're right.
Yeah.
All right. Get us into the next one, Dodger.
Sweet. Okay. It is the Dracus Trapin. I think this is a really sweet card. It's a 1 mana 1/2. For some reason it's a zombie mutant warrior. I don't know why it's a mutant, but
Has more arms.
okay, I guess. Yeah.
Also, mutant is a relevant tribe in the custom Magic verse in general.
Okay. It has tap, sack a creature. Target player cards a card and lose 2 life. But you can only activate it anytime you cast sorcery, obviously. I think this is a really neat piece for the kind of like mono black or like heavily black it is the kind of card like that in addition to the kind of deck that wants to run Imp Den Mother, you can get kind of sacrifice creatures for value. I think this card definitely wants to go in the same deck as Obscene Recitation because you can both attack their hand and sacrifice the creature that you tethered onto. So it's just like kind of a neat little duo card. What are you guys' thoughts on it?
Yeah, I think this card really makes it clear just how messed up Autumnal Watch is. But I think if you weren't in red, this card gives you a actually decent reason to want to play, or basically to be able to play non-red aristocrat-style decks, like Dravos's black-white aristocrats deck. I think that would have slam dunked this card.
Oh yeah, for sure.
The fact that it caused them to lose life means it immediately enables Shadowband Shadowband Console to come back. So that's neat. I think the fact you can only use it once per turn obviously limits it, but it doesn't have a mana cost, but you can't use it when you play it. I think this card does what you want a 1-drop to do in those archetypes, but it's not going to be the card that like takes your deck, puts it on its back, and carries it home. It's just going to make your deck hum a little bit smoother.
Yeah, I mean those are generally the kind of cards I like. Because I usually will build a deck. It's like, this is the X card deck. Every other card in this deck is made to make that one X card perform at 100%. You know, so this is the kind of card that I might see myself including in deck as a glue piece.
On to the next card, which is probably the better black 1-drop creature.
Yeah.
The last card's the best black 1-drop in this set, but the next one's the better black 1-drop creature. Is Tidehull Lich. So this card does a lot of different things, but the most important thing to consider, and the thing that I didn't like quite realize about the card when I was looking at it initially, is that this being an artifact creature is the reason to play it. So it's 1 black for a 2/1, it can't block, you can cast it from your graveyard as long as you control an artifact creature, and it has Embellish, which notably you can embellish it from the graveyard, so that's great. I was low on this partially because Departed Evangel and Shadowband Console are such absurd cards, and because I'm hyper aware of how good Singularity's Grasp is. So I don't usually put much stock in artifact creatures sticking around. But with that said, this just being an aggressively slanted 1-drop artifact creature turns out to be good enough. Like, the white Savannah Lions artifact creature has seen play before, mostly in Blues' lists, and the fact that this is so much better than that card really makes it shine in a way that I wasn't anticipating.
Yeah, and I really like how it kind of fuels itself. I made a deck with this where if you embellish this and then you just start attacking, right, and you've got your Thopter and your 2/1, they have the option of either blocking this and having it die, and then you can immediately cast it again. Now you've got another Thopter, or just taking 2. And if they get low enough, they just have to keep blocking this, and then you keep making your Thopters. Additional copies of this means like you're part of artifact creatures, but you draw another Tidehull Lich. Well, congrats, you got the whole train started again.
And I also didn't expect the embellish mode to come up as much as it does. Like, I think if you're in anything mid-rangey, the embellish mode on this is far from flavor text. Like, you don't want this to be your 4-drop, but it allows you to run some cards that provide decent mana sinks in a deck where, for instance, you want your most expensive creature to be a 2-drop.
Yeah, well, it's just really nice that if you flood out, like, your Savannah Lions is now giving you a mana sink. Like, I think there's a lot of hidden value in there. And again, the fact that it's and other artifact actually is also very relevant for a lot of these artifact decks.
So, Dodger, do you want to sing the praises of the next card?
Yes, I do very much.
Since you're responsible for this card having, what, like 20-something? 17 copies in this GP.
Okay, so the next card is Unearth. It is, I believe, the best card in Alara. It is also a reprint. No, I'm not even joking. I believe it's the best card in the set. It is 1 black for a sorcery. It reads, return target creature card with convert through left battlefield. And it's card you see it be good in, it was good when it was first printed in, I think, Urza's Legacy, or some Urza set.
It
So
was
it was fine.
that was
Like it
that was
wasn't
not
great.
that was not the axis where that standard was being thought on in any
Yeah.
capacity.
Yeah. What? It was good. It was reprinted in Modern Horizons, and it's still pretty decent in Modern. But in MSEM, this card becomes a whole other thing, and there are a couple reasons for that. One of them is that we have a lot of like redrop creatures, and we also have a lot of really good ways to get them into the graveyard. It's like Oracle's Vision, cantrips that mill, Wheat from Chaff, stuff like that. But we also have these little things called the Torment Lands. And in case you're unfamiliar somehow with Torment Lands, you can have them untapped, either paying 3 life, sacrificing a non-land permanent, or the only thing anyone ever does with them is discard a card. So if you run out a black Torment Land, discard a 3-draw creature, you can immediately cast Unearth and put the card on the battlefield, and you've essentially got yourself a little built-in Dark Ritual. It just reads like Dark Ritual a lot of the time because you're able to incidentally mill a creature with some sort of like milling effect. And there are plenty. So I'll say I've built like 10 different Unearth decks already, and 4 of them are being run in the GP. Someone net decked my Grixis Parrot Pools combo deck that runs Unearth. I'm running a black Unearth deck and selling an old version of that deck. Someone else is running another Unearth deck. I forget. I think I made that deck as well. But basically, the card is absolutely ludicrous. Like there are so many great 3-drops to run. Personally, I'm running the Former of Ambition, and then also Inish 2 and Slide Order. And I think any of those, yeah. So okay, I'm rambling. Sorry, I'll stop. But this card is insane. Absolutely.
Apparently Plipster is running on Earth in Dredge.
Okay, yeah.
Because then it also enables the
Chantwood
Channeler. It enables the Chantwood Channeler kill. It synergizes with Ceaseless Stalker, obviously, and most of your creatures are less than 4 mana, except for Unbound Tremora, so it just gives you a little bit of redundancy.
Another great interaction with this card is Deadwood Terror. If you go turn 1, Deadwood Terror, unearth it, you now have 6 power on the board turn 1, which is definitely not negligible. And on top of that, so like this card is cycling.
Yeah, like, don't cycle this card. Just hold on to it. It'll come up.
Okay. The fact can though, I have cycled it. Like I think I played Earth decks in. Okay, I played Black White Unearth in a league, and I played a lot of test matches before the GP, and I've also played 1 GP match. I think I've cycled Unearth maybe 5 times. Like I'm guessing 30 games. Like it is. There are times where you don't draw the creatures trying to get back, and you just more guess. And so the fact that when this card's dead, you can just cycle it too. Like that is the amount of value.
The thing that people did a bunch with this card in Legacy, for the brief period of time it showed up as like a one of in Grixis midrange / Grixis pile, was unearthing Snapcasters who would then unearth another thing, usually Baleful Strix. And that's kind of the stuff I want to be doing in this format, but I have not found a deck or cards which make me feel good doing those things.
Well, there's this. Actually, there are a couple other cards. I think Elemental is another very good turn 1 unearth target. Because land unearth in Trail Elemental. Next turn, if you milled a card, you can cast unearth on that thing, so you can kind of do the same sort of thing.
Yeah,
I also think Arcanist Reaver is nice because you can cycle it and then unearth it back, and that card's also just good. So, like, I don't know.
Yeah, I also like how we've just taken an approach of, okay, we were going to nerf all of these cards that cheat out or do something based on power instead of CMC. And then Chantwood Channeler comes along and it's like, hey guys, so actually turns out my CMC is 3, so I can still stick around and have fun, right? And Unearth is like, yeah, best bros for life. Let's do this.
I will also say, have you ever done a turn 1 Performer of Ambition?
I have not.
Pleasant. It is not pleasant at all.
I have cast several turn 2 Performers of Ambition back when I had access to soul lands in this format, but um, honestly, I totally forgot about how the Torment lands worked with Unearth, just because
Yeah.
I've been evaluating Unearth as, well, this is a very powerful card to have in the mid to late game, and the fact that you can use it as a Dark Ritual just completely went by me.
Yeah. It's Dark Ritual that essentially.
Yeah, Dark Ritual plus plus plus, I'm sure. All right,
Yeah.
so let's go into red.
Okay, sorry that was so long.
Yeah, we're an hour and 20 minutes in. We've gone through 3 colors, and we have 33 multicolored cards afterwards. So
Yeah, we have
Yeah,
not
I'm-
even hit we have not even hit the stride. So let's
I'm
speed it up.
I'm a little bit worried.
Okay.
All
Oh
right,
yeah.
so
Before I know that before we move on, I just want to quickly mention Chromeleon because it is the appointed mascot of the set by Mako. So go and show this little lizard boy some love. I know I'm saying this right after we said we're going to speed up, but yeah, that's all I have to say about it. Now we can talk about Hellspark Prankster.
Good in Pond Tender loops, like all I'm saying.
Hellspark Prankster, cool card in that its floor is a 2/1 haste for 2 mana, which not bad. It discounts instant sorceries you cast, also pretty good, and it has the ability to, you know, really mess with people's removal, because as long as it's sitting there untapped and you have red mana, your opponent, if they have creatures, can't go to remove your creature. If they have Pithwilt and control, a any other random enchantment or whatever, you can change that. If they're trying to use burn spells as removal, those burn spells hit them in the face now. So yeah, card can do some kind of whack stuff.
I think the threat of an onboard, like onboard switcheroo is, or miss the better, and it's like pretty scary. I think it's kind of awkward. You have to tap it to do so. So that means if you're doing so, it means you're not attacking with it. Um, so that feels kind of at odds. I guess you can, since it has haste, you can just play it and then hold up a red to protect your creatures. And the fact that it makes your own spells cheaper is nice for like the tempo deck. So I guess I could kind of see it getting there. This card doesn't feel like the package is something I'm interested in running personally, though.
All right. Next card is Nakatl Skirmisher. I mean, this card's neat because it's a very decent. So this card does 2 different things that you want it to do. One, it's kind of this neat little anthem for if you run creatures base power 2 or more, which realistically you do. I think Stampede is very powerful the smaller the creature is, actually.
Yeah.
Banished Companion.
Yeah, so, you curve this into a 2-drop haste creature, you swing, it's a 2/2, it's kind of a 3/2 because it also pumped the other creature. It's great. It also is a way to run Artifact Destruction in your aggro decks without decreasing your threat density, which I value very highly.
Yeah, I mean, I think I pretty much agree with everything you said.
I want to add a third point. I think there's a third thing that this does really well, and that's have the goofiest proportioned art that I've ever seen. My God.
It's because we're looking at him as he's breaking down our house door, and we're like, dude, that was my house door, and he's like, I don't care.
Shit.
Okay, that, but also this dude looks like he's got the thinnest waist, the hourglass figure on point.
No, not an hourglass.
I think
He's
it's
got
just
a
the
fucking
proportion
Dorito
for,
body.
like,
Dorito body, yeah. Oh man. Yeah, sorry, Dodger. Go ahead.
Oh, well, the last thing I was gonna say is that this is a neat little survivor creature. I've been tinkering with a nihilist that runs this, like kind of in the zoo style deck, but I haven't really hit the right proportion of stuff, I think.
Yeah. The next card is Savage Battle Mage. This is one of the other battle mages and one of the few other playable ones. So for 1 in red, it's a 2/1. 3 in a black, you mill 2 cards. Each opponent loses 2 life. That's not a real mode. The other one is the real mode, which allows you to put a land card from your hand or graveyard onto the battlefield tapped for 2 mana. So the fact it puts it in tapped means you can't do absolutely ludicrous things with like a Wayfarer Shrine. But this card still has repeated rampant growth from your graveyard, which is pretty great.
There are the shifting lands.
Yeah, that's a good point. Although
Yeah.
the mana they make or the land they make enters tapped, So does it
Imperial
really help
Reverence.
you?
Imperial Reverence.
Unless you start running what is it, Pinnacle of Vigor, Imperial Reverence, or Kurzmite Purveyor, I think. The
Yeah,
one
that would
red,
work. That would
yeah,
work.
that would in fact allow you to generate a arbitrary number of lands. So go ahead and curve Purveyor into Battle Mage into. It needs to be a 1-drop.
Arpetian Champion.
Into actually, yeah, Arpetian Champion into Savage Battle Mage into Purveyor, kill your opponent. That's
oh
the
my
game.
goodness.
So anyway, we found another turn 3 combo deck. Love doing that. Savage Battle Mage is just good enough. Like, I think the first ability is kind of negligible until you hit the late game, in which case this thing that had ramped you a bunch is also a mana sink, which is kind of messed up.
That's
And
true.
if you mill over a like good utility land that you didn't want to mill over, great, it's now on the battlefield. Does not matter. You can use it to repeatedly put back creature lands onto the battlefield, or if you have lands that sacrifice for value or discard for value, they're now on the battlefield. So I think this card is really dumb, and just a matter of finding a deck that wants it.
Yeah, I'm also relatively high on it. I think that being able to recur fetch lands is strong. Again, I do think that like being a 2-mana 2/1 without immediate impact, which is like a weird thing to say, but like I think that like it's a little iffy. But I'm much higher on this than the other battle mage because of the 2-mana mode being the relevant one. Okay, and it looks like we can move on to our last red card, which is actually secretly a 5-color card in disguise that sneaked in somehow. It's World Hard Avatar. So 3 in a red for a 3/4 double striker. Pretty reasonable body. The I would write home about it. But the main thing is, the first spell you cast on each of your turns costs Wooburg less to cast. So basically, if you're running this in a deck, which I think this is kind of the pipe dream, but then if you are running this in a deck with like Wooburg spells, you can kind of just go nuts by free casting some of them, and not feel embarrassed by also just playing this as a threat. Like we're gonna be getting into some of the powerful Wooburg cards later, but yeah.
Yeah, I think this card is just kind of weird. Because you need to untap with it, because this is obviously the first spell you cast on the turn you play it. It's each of your turns. So
See,
you
but
can't,
what you do is you flash it in with Witch's Invocation, and then.
So, and it's also just a powerful body, and it's a 4-drop, so your opponent doesn't want to let you untap with it to begin with. And unless the Wooburg cards you're running have. So, I think you can look at it kind of as a mana flare, where since you're effectively gaining 5 mana a turn, as long as you can use it, when you untap on turn 5, you have 10 mana. 5 of that mana has to be spent on something specific, 5 it doesn't. The issue that happens is when you don't use all that mana, especially if you just have a Wooburg threat in hand and then don't actually have any follow-up, this card becomes a lot more pointless, because you otherwise could just curve, 3 in a red, you can easily curve that into Wooburg. I think the card's still good. I don't like that it has an active non-bow with Maelstrom Elemental. But I think the card has potential. It just is going to require some weird deck building to make it work.
Yeah, I can agree with that.
Yeah, I think that's a fair assessment. But I think it's a very cool Timmy card that I think players who are into that kind of playstyle are going to try out regardless. So, and with that, do y'all think I can move on to green?
Sounds good.
Okay, so we here at MSEM already have a very strong suite of mana dorks. I think, like, of course, Mana Ascetic is kind of just the best with its Wooburg production possibilities. Keen's Devoted is pretty good as a backup, and then you get into the weeds of other stuff like Dovan, which are not as flexible in terms of colors, but have good utility. So it's very hard to like print. Yeah, that is the niche I was referring to. Also the Grave Hate, but yeah, it's hard to print a mana dork that kind of comes in and is like, okay, I'm going to make an impact as well. But I think that our next card, Hierarch Ranger, does an excellent job of that. It's okay. Let me hype it up. Give me my hype.
Okay.
Okay. So it doesn't produce Wooburg on its own. And as the name suggests, I think it is a reference to what's the name of the? It's the hierarch. Y'all know
Noble hierarch.
noble hierarch, right? Which is a because encourage is kind of an exalted riff. It's a similar thing. Um, so at its base, it just adds green. It's a worse Land of War Elves. Where its power really comes in is that you can use its encourage ability to basically buff up another creature, and when you do that, it adds 1 mana of any color. So you can actually um, essentially use it as a pump spell and as a Wooburg Mana Dork in the same turn, if you have the kind of creature density uh, that you'd want. So I think this is ideal in a deck where like you're primarily like you're not really going to need the Wooburg mode early, um, or maybe at all. But you need a mana dork that can, and you're also a relatively aggressive green deck, and that's my assessment of it.
So we do have access to something that's just a Llanowar Elf. Just 1 green, taps for green, is a 1/1. Earth Channel Initiate, I think is what it's called.
Yeah.
Um, I think that card is arguably better than Hierarch Ranger. The main issue with Hierarch Ranger is the circumstance where you want your mana dork to have a power is when you don't have board presence. The fact that Hierarch Ranger only adds your board presence if you have other creatures, it's like, okay, well, that's not your job. That's not why I hired you. And the fact that to fix mana, you have to have a creature and then be casting stuff in your pre-combat main phase is just, it's a really rough sell to me. I think this might be I think this is like maybe tied with Earth Channel Initiate for our 4th best mana dork. I think Keen's Devoted just outshines this card insanely well. I think Dovin is probably better than this card. But this card is one of the cards that I really like the design philosophy behind it, and it would obviously be like format defining in its standard, but MSEM is not a standard.
I don't know. I feel like there are decks. I don't know. I just feel like there should be decks where um, you care about buffing your creature, like say you're running a double striker or a lifelinker or something like that, and you also just want to work. I feel like there are plenty of decks where you can cast spells main phase 1 without freaking out too much. And I think that you're not going to run this in a deck as a fixing dork. You're obviously going to run mana ascetic instead. But I think this card definitely has a home.
Yeah,
I don't know if that home is good, but
I agree with you that its home is where the encourageability is one of the more important parts of this card's text. Like you need something where you need a mana dork, and you also are running these force multipliers that just take pumps and make them much better. Um, I'm kind of struggling to picture where that lines up. Like, I've played a lot of creature-based decks in this format. I've played a lot of mid-range decks that want a bunch of dorks, and just all of them, this would be really awkward for me in terms of sequencing. And that's kind of a rough sell. The first deck that kind of comes to mind is a abomination of a 4-color Morose Harpist list, where you can play this, so you can turn 2 Morose Harpist, and then you're also playing the Panharmonicon for instants and sorceries that we'll see later. Because that's a good way to care about the +1/+1 and mana fixing.
I don't know because I think the deck is going to run base green. So that makes me a little less high on it in that deck, but maybe there's a variant that does want to do that. I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know. I think this is just like I have a diametrically different view of what kind of decks I think this should go in, I suppose.
All right.
I think we can all agree on the type of deck that the next card should go in, though. Or at least, I think if we don't, Dodger
Dodger,
would.
do you want to talk about this deck?
Very briefly, yeah. So the next card is Doctor Yearling. It is a 2/2, and I believe it. Yeah, that's true. It also has Stampede. Whenever it and a creature with greater power attack, it gets a +1/+1 counter. So obviously, you're not gonna. It's gonna get harder and harder to grow this as you keep activating its Stampede. So, you're gonna want creatures. You're gonna want other creatures that are big, like Mossy Companion. But the deck that this goes in is obviously Lone Survivor because it's a beast. And Cyber runs 3 mana 5/5s, 4 mana 5/5s, so it works pretty well into those. I think it's been performing pretty well so far. It doesn't has the disadvantage of not really like messing with your opponent at all and like a lot of hate bears, but it does hit pretty hard. Like being able to eventually attack it as a 3/3 on turn 4-ish is not bad. And having it scale up into late games nice. So I don't know. I think it's the jury's still out, but I think it's interesting, and I'd be interested in see like what other ways you can utilize it.
Okay, and I
and
think
then
the next card is in a
I
similar.
was gonna say,
So
Yes, is War Pride Champion. It's a 3 mana 3/3 warrior, so it's once again a lone survivor include. It can be blocked by creatures with power 2 or less, and then it also has Stampede. Whenever it and a creature with greater power attack, you get to give a creature +2/+2 until end of turn. So the potential for this to attack as a 5/5, or spread the love around to your other creatures. We talked about that force multiplier thing can be relevant. I think that this can be also very good in Lone Survivor because, like, obviously you're running these massive creatures for very little mana. So having this combo with Lone Survivor, Moss Companion, Mercifully Rhoda, etc., means you can smash in for a lot of damage, which is, and the fact that it can be also give that a lot of impact on a lot of little dudes.
all right.
yep, and green was
So-
I think that was green was pretty simple. So
Yeah, we have done the possible, which is go over all the monocolored cards. Now we have the question of doing the impossible, which is going over all of the multicolored cards. So
yeah.
let's start us off with a good removal spell. So
Wait, you actually think this is good? I'm surprised.
Aetherpool is great. Yeah.
I'm just thinking by
Aetherpool is-
Pip's usual standard, I think is mana efficiency. So I think that's why I was a little surprised. That's all.
So I'm not a fan of Aetherpool in the main deck of control decks, but I think it is a card that has a very good place in sideboards, specifically because it is so good at beating the strategies that control struggles with. Or it's not going to single-handedly beat creature-based mid-range decks, which this is really good against, but it's a powerful tool versus those decks. Specifically what I'm thinking is Aetherpool allows you to keep up with a deck where every single one of their creatures is a 2-for-1. It won't immediately overtake them, and it's not a one-stop solution, but it's a kill spell that also reverses the creature's ETB, which means you can usually cleanly 1-for-1 it. And in some cases, you can end up generating card advantage, even against a creature that drew a card on ETB, if under specific circumstances. But it's also just a really cool card. I like the art. I can imagine it'll be better in EDH where the mana efficiency doesn't matter.
Oh yeah.
But yeah, I don't know if there's much to talk about here.
I mean, I think it's nice that you can steal the ETBs and death triggers, and also your opponent's death triggers. So like, there are definitely metas where the drawback, or sorry, the benefit like varies in value.
A little part of me wishes that it had like a you may return to the battlefield under your control.
So you could use it still as an exile,
yeah,
exile
exactly,
removal.
exactly.
Yeah,
But
I
we
also think
live
there's a good
in the
reason why it
reality.
doesn't.
Yeah.
Ajani Resolute, however, on the subject of hard exile removal. Dodger, do you want to sell us on this card?
Sure, yeah. So Johnny Resolute is a green white planeswalker. He's got 4 abilities, and he enters with 4 loyalty. So the first one is +1. Distribute 2 players among up to 2 creatures. You gain 2 life. So that ability suggests you want to be, in general, a deck that wants cheap creatures. -1 is create a 2/2, which is fine. Like planeswalkers that create tokens are usually good, and the fact that it only costs 1 loyalty means you can play him, make a token to protect himself, and then potentially untap and use another ability next turn. -3 is Path to Exile something, so having a removal spell attached to a Johnny is also really nice. And finally, the ultimate is -7. You get an emblem with control, get +X. X is your life total. So obviously that'll usually let you smash for like main damage. I think that where this card shines is creature decks, obviously, but particularly creature decks that can ramp Johnny out quickly. I think Johnny definitely has very few boards where he's terrible, because if your opponent has only one creature, then you can exile it. It's only weak if you're behind by multiple creatures. So if you play like turn 1 Mana Dork, turn 2 creature, turn 3 Johnny, that's a very solid curve. I think that compared to Salem and Kerto, it's a little sketch, because Salem and Kerto is such a ridiculous card. So
or even compared to Bahoum. I think Bahoum is like a weird
Bahoum
thing.
is another one, yeah.
Yeah, it's like the same cost, and it's just like, I think the thing is like Bahoum is a little bit more like, I guess the intent is for it to be a little bit more like meta-y. So if there comes a time where like Bahoum's abilities aren't as relevant, then perhaps, but it feels like Bahoum just kind of is always relevant.
There's a difference though, which is Bahoum is a very good answer. Bahoum isn't exactly a threat. Like, technically, yes, if Bahoum ultimates, that's like a threat, but that's not quite the same thing, whereas Johnny Resolute is undeniably a threat. You can play Johnny, you can immediately make a 2-2, and then you can start growing the 2-2. Or you can make more 2-2s. Like, I think a Johnny is going to, and that's the thing that Salem and Kerto don't get. They generate more card advantage than a Johnny does, but being able to create a single 3-3 is not even remotely as powerful as create a 2-2, then add 2 power to board every single turn. I think a Johnny will live and die by the virtue of being a threat. The main issue is there's now another threat at that exact cost, because Sevid is now a 4-drop. I think a Johnny versus 4-drop Sevid is a really close argument, but I think a Johnny is straight up better in mid-range decks, in creature decks that want to play to the board, and Sevid is better in control decks.
Yeah, because Sevid doesn't really answer anything.
Yep, Sevid doesn't answer things. Sevid's board presence doesn't start getting scary until the late game, but Sevid also draws cards, and drawing cards is very good. But I think I would be shocked if a Johnny didn't see play, is where I'm at.
Okay, so next up is, I think it's a card which I'm interested to see play, but I'm also very skeptical of. It's Angel of Succor. I don't know how to pronounce it.
Wait,
pronounce that word.
Are we not? Oh, okay. Sorry, I thought we were going to talk about the Croc. I misread. Let's talk about the Angel.
Oh yeah, we're not. Ambush Gariel is a cool card, but it was nerfed, so fuck that card. So Angel of Succor. I really don't know how to pronounce that. So Succor. Okay, Succor. Just bear with me. I'm sorry, guys. It's 1 in a band for 3/3 flyer, which gives you hexproof on your turn. The main draw, though, is being able to untap all lands you control during each other player's untap step. I think in MSEM, one hard sell of this is the fact that it's a 4-drop with 3 toughness. It's a little easy to remove in that regard. But also the ability to just be like, okay, I'm going to play this, and because it itself gives itself hexproof during your turn, your opponent can't answer it before you untap, so you basically don't lose the mana if you have like something to play on their turn, which if you're playing this, you should be doing that. So also in EDH, this is kind of disgusting. So
I was going to say, in what world is this easy to remove? It has hexproof, and then you have counter magic.
Yeah, okay, fair. I didn't think of the counter magic point, but yeah.
That's the thing, is it's not even a triggered ability, like Prophet of Krufix is. It is just straight up, you untap during other players' untap steps, which means that the second they can remove it, you can instead, cast a spell that gives it hexproof, or cast a counterspell, or, do any sort of nonsense. Flash out another creature in response. Like, this card is a card where I think the only thing that will hold it back is if specifically Bant decks aren't interested in it. I think it is an incredibly powerful tool for mid-range and control decks, and maybe even tempo decks.
Mm-hmm.
I like this is the top end for the kind of flash style decks, and those decks are also getting a very powerful conclusion that we'll probably talk about in a bit. Sweet, yeah, I think this card's cool.
Yeah.
All right.
Never forget the draft where Matt got 2 of these back to back.
Oh, Jesus Christ.
And I think still ended up going 1/1 drop.
Actually,
Alara draft is wild.
Brief note in terms of this card. I believe during scriptures, or shall we either we're going to talk about or did talk about a card that untaps each enchanted land you control during each other player's untap step.
Rubite
Um,
Field.
yeah, this I think makes me much more interested in a lot of the sorts of auras we were talking about than that does. Like just in terms of you getting to double up on utility lands, getting to attack in with a creature land without going shields down. I don't know, this card, like, the more I look at it, the more I'm convinced this card is just actually the nuts.
It's really nice to be able to just like Nareba untap.
Jesus
You know what I mean?
Christ.
Like, yeah, that's
Oh,
very
that's
powerful.
actually really disgusting. Oh, that's actually.
Although, I feel like once I hit 4 mana, then use 7 mana, then I'm winning is not exactly a good sell, but, like, also,
Well,
you
like
know,
that's
Noreba's
not like the only thing this card does.
yeah, exactly.
Like, you can
It's
play it immediately untap, interact.
the fact that it's so hard to get blown out by using this card, like, the exception is basically just Exeunt, and Exeunt is, like, kind of starting to fade out of favor as much.
Or counter magic.
Yeah, but it's a 4-drop, and it's not monocolored. This thing's basically uncounterable. Like, okay, you can Unraveling it, I guess.
You can Arcane Genesis
Moral
it.
fracture.
Okay, if you Arcane Genesis this, didn't we just establish it's a Nareba deck?
Yeah, no, I'm not saying that it's a good plan, but I'm also just saying that like, I think that like we're getting to a weird point where I think you can weigh playing Arcane Genesis to a reasonable degree just because of how diverse the threats are getting. So I could see people playing Arcane Genesis more and like just kind of being like, fuck it, if they're a slow deck and they have like Monument or Nareba, that sucks. But I need like my versatile counter magic. It probably still won't end well for them, but it would still be answerable in that situation, if that makes sense.
Simon and I did discuss that Arcane Genesis is probably the single best counterspell in the format versus Podlight, and it's just really fortunate that that is a card that no one can afford to play because of how the format is currently set up.
Yeah, I mean, it's still one of my favorite cards, and I will absolutely jam it. But yeah. Okay, so next up is another another card that's really close to my heart. I think lots of these multicolored cards are just really cool designs. It's Antali Archdruid. I feel like Dodger should take this one because he's been getting all the cats.
Well, I think this card is it's good in two different decks that I sort of champion. One of which is Lone Survivor, and one of which is Wonderfall. I believe Mako is playing it in a Lone Survivor deck built. And basically, what that deck is, it's a Naya Lone Survivor ramp. So you're trying to ramp out Lone Survivor quickly, and then also ramp into even bigger things after that. And Antali Archdruid can be like a nice extra 3-drop that you can ramp into off your mana dork, and then also help you ramp out a 5-drop. Wonderfall, it's a little more dicey. I'm not entirely sure if it fits. I haven't tried building with it, but it's potentially worth a splash because obviously the playing additional land effect can stack well with Seeker, and the potential for having an extra removal spell plus gain life on it is nice. I think the fact that this was nerfed to an attack trigger instead of an end step trigger is a big deal because you can't play it and then immediately get the trigger unless you Blood River it. So that makes me a lot less high on this than I potentially could be. But the fact that you can trigger this with only one land means that you don't necessarily have to have 2 lands in your hand to get the effect going. So I think it's definitely a pretty interesting and powerful effect in the right deck.
Yeah. I think like definitely like the version it was because it was nerfed to an attack rather than end step trigger. Obviously, I think the end step trigger would have been like really powerful, but
that would have been far too good because you could easily play this off of fetch land and then just immediately like
yeah. Now it's a little more reasonable.
Yeah. I think that the scenarios where you get this out on turn 2 are very, very strong, but otherwise I'm much less high on it.
Yeah. Also, one thing is that I think you do want a steady card flow to keep this card running, essentially. Like, obviously, fetch lands enable it, and you want to play a high degree of those, which is why it's good in Wonderfall. But otherwise, I think that, like, you could also just, you could run this with stuff like RFE, which naturally, like, it draws more cards and helps that ramp plan. So I think that, like, I'd be interested in seeing like a deck that kind of does that. Don't know how good it'll be, but I'm interested.
Yeah,
I think I think when this card's good is basically when you can ignore the first line of text. I
Yes,
think just
agreed.
treating this as a Lightning Helix engine and just making the assumption that there will be some way for you to enable it every single turn, whether that's via fetch lands or the red battle mage that we were talking about earlier,
Sangjin.
Sangjin, like, or just okay, well, I'll have a single turn where I'm off of it, and then the next turn I'll helix something again. Like, I think that's kind of where you want to be because it's going to generate real meaningful card advantage with every attack.
Yeah.
Lightning Helix is not a sloucher of a card, but I also think that it's kind of kept in check by the fact, it's 3 mana, it does not have any built-in resiliency, and it's I'm I'm not going to quote diced removal too hard, but when we're starting to talk about 3 drops that you need to like get sustained value off of, that's kind of the thing that comes up.
Yeah, I mean, this does die to almost every removal spell that's played.
Yeah, and it's
I
a 3
think.
drop.
Yeah.
Like, I think this card is scariest when it's coming down turn 2.
Yeah, agreed.
Especially because in that case you very likely have the 3rd land in hand. Of course, then you need to weigh whether or not you actually want to play the land that turn or wait till the next turn, but that's kind of beside the point.
Well, so one thing I'll say is that I think that you can pretty trivially use this as a ramp spell and still hit the effect because mono fetches are a thing. And mono fetches make that a lot easier.
Mono fetches do still require that you have another land after that mono fetch, I guess is my issue. Like, we're talking now about a 4-land hand.
If you're playing a Wonderful strategy, you usually will.
Okay, yeah, that's fair.
Yeah. Because the deck runs like 27, 28 lands.
And also a Sacred Gate.
Yeah, Sacred Gate with this plus fetches feels great.
Yeah. All right, next card.
Yeah, and I feel like the next card is also a Dodger card because of Dodgers 2. I guess Dodger, you've got the 3 signature decks: Wanderfall, Lone Survivor, and
Parapools. People who are doing this with prowess creatures are suckers. Parapools. This is what you do. Okay, it's multicolor. It curves after parapools. After that, if you've got it in play, every single spell you cast gets you 2 parrots. Call your opponent to death. Boom, boom. The other fun thing you can do with this is with Morose Harpist. Morose Harpist is a pretty obscure from Surging Tide, so of course no one knows about it. It is a 3 mana 0/3, I think, with prowess.
But actually, like his history, fun fact, it actually I think used to be a reasonably storm win con back in the early days of this format, if I remember right.
Okay.
And also that short-lived Embrace Madness list.
Embrace Madness didn't run Harvest.
Well, no, yeah. I'm pretty sure it was, yeah. Jan was running it, I think.
That sounds super fake, but no.
I died to it, so...
Version 1 ran it as a 1-of in the sideboard. That's, that got cut also. But
it was in the list.
Notably, Morose Harpist actually was involved in one of our earlier combo decks. It wasn't Storm, technically, but it used a card called Surging Calic, and it is one of the decks that popularized the O2 nerf meme, where back when our format was double elimination tournaments, one of the things that semi-frequently happened is someone brought a combo deck that was actually kind of busted, but just got unlucky, lost their first 2 matches and was eliminated, and then their deck ate a nerf, or in one extreme case, a ban, before they could play it again, just because the council realized that deck got unlucky, but that deck on paper is nuts. And Morose Harpist is one of the origin points of the meme because it used it alongside Surging Calic, which was /is Wild Defiance on a creature, basically. So the combo was you play that, which was hexproof, then you play Morose Harpist and you target it with like a brute force, and you just immediately deal 7 damage to your opponent.
So, regarding Arcanist Reaver, if you have Morose Harpist and Arcanist Reaver in play, if you cast any non-creature spell and then respond with a spell that buffs Arcanist power by 3, say Tear Through, your opponent just dies.
Yep.
Because it doubles all of those triggers. And the triggers that go on the stack at the bottom will resolve twice at the end, meaning your opponent will lose in scientific terms, a metric buttload of life.
Yeah,
So,
if you want
yeah.
to do the math, you're a nerd. So let's talk about Bant Command. One of the coolest cards I've had the pleasure of going 1-8 with this month.
Yeah, all you have to see if you don't want to do the math, you just have to count to 2 with this one, baby.
So Bant Command requires that you be playing blue, white, and green, aka mostly reasonable colors to be running in a control deck. Green's the only odd one out here, but hey, you have options. And it is on its floor a 4/4 Mana War, or a 4/4 that counters a burn spell pointed at your face, or a discard spell, or it kills a creature power 4 greater and bounces another. I've answered Chile Demons very cleanly with this thing. Also, Shimmering Dragons very cleanly with this thing. Like, this card is very flexible, and the really scary thing is, its fail case is it's a 4 mana 4/4 with Vigilance.
Yeah, and Flash.
Yeah, and Flash. Important to note. But yeah,
I think this is still the best command that ever got nerfed. I don't know if you guys agree with me.
I strongly agree still.
Yeah. But like this is it has by far the best fail case, and then also very, very good like situational modes, because you getting hexproof is quite relevant with, you know, pretty reasonably played deck. And having a removal spell that actually hits like, I don't know, I would say like a fair proportion of the stuff that you want to kill, while having that to do is very nice. So this card is insane. It's more of like, it's limited by the colors of the decks that you can play it in.
Also, by being a 4-drop, I think if it was obviously if it was 3, it'd be insane. But yeah.
Yeah, I think that's a non-zero point. Like, I do think this is the best 4-drop for kind of Bant Flash style decks. Like, I think if you're still running Arcana Marchmage, you're kind of insane.
Wait, do you mean Spectrum Archmage?
Yeah, that one. It's from Memoriam Arcana. Give me a break.
That one.
So I want to skip ahead to our next card, because this is the first of the 2 or 3 busted Wooburg cards that we'll be talking about.
I think we got 3. Yeah.
Yeah. So Conflux Ravager, Wooburg for 4/4, ETB, destroy target non-land permanent opponent controls, has cycling 2. I don't know if you kids remember, but back in the day, one of the better ramp decks in the format ran Soul of Acathia, specifically because it was a Wooburg creature that didn't totally suck. Actually, I think it was the only legal Wooburg creature at that point.
It was, yeah. And this is one that puts itself in the grave with no additional effort.
The reason we're talking about the grave is because we're thinking about this for Leyline Alignment Field, which is...
Yeah, Leyline Alignment Field, which is a land where if you dump this on turn 2, you can have Wooburg on turn 3.
Right.
Like full Wooburg.
So the main thing that I think is really interesting about Conflux Ravager is it's both A good enabler for that deck, and B, it's not the greatest payoff you could possibly get, but it's a respectable one. It's a 4/4, it enters battlefield, and it answers any problem permanent. The only deck where this is going to struggle versus is versus decks that just don't play to the board at all, which those exist. Like, you know, maybe you'll snipe a Planeswalker or Heraldry if you're lucky, but you'll still get a 2-for-1. But in those cases, you can also just cycle it to find dumber payoffs if you have dumber payoffs. I don't think there's like an infinite amount to talk about this card. I think it is the least powerful of the Wooburg cards that we're going to be looking at, but yeah. I think it's a very respectable card.
Least power in and of itself, but what it enables is something that is very powerful.
No, I think straight up it is weaker than those other ones, because those other ones are just also better threats to cast off of it, and that deck didn't struggle to discard those cards. Like, I think this is less of an upgrade for Leyline Alignment Field decks than Maelstrom Elemental is.
Spoilers.
Yeah, I think that's fair. Yeah.
But okay. it is better than the other best fit. Anyway, Dodger, talk about this really fucked up Chupacabra.
Okay. So, Earthbreaker
which is, according to people on Reddit, is going to kill us all and ruin 2020.
So, Earthbreaker Behemoth is a 5-mana 6/6 red-green. When it enters the battlefield, it deals damage equal to its power, 6, to up to 1 target creature you don't control, excess damage goes straight to that controller's face. So it's kind of like the Rambu effect. Um, this card is absolutely insane, and I'm surprised that the only people running it are decks that I built or me telling Egg to run it in his Jund deck. Like this is easily the best Chupacabra effect I think we've got in the format right now. It could, but I just don't really see any other Chupacabra that competes with this in any decks that can reasonably cast it at least. I think that weirdly enough, one of the things that this card is best at is killing 1/1s, because green decks often don't have a ton of reach, and if you're playing this deck, your card in your deck is probably base green. So, just being able to kill a 1/1 and immediately smack someone for 5 is actually really, really nice for your random like green aggro decks that might struggle against the board of blockers.
I'm gonna slightly disagree with that and say it is red. This isn't like a mono green card. If you want reach, you can get it. Like, the thing that makes this card powerful, I mean, you've played with it, so you have better sense than I do, but I feel like it's a slight exaggeration. Like
well, I think that in ramp decks, you oftentimes don't have the slots to run a ton of burn because you need slots to run ramp, and you also need the things to ramp into.
Yeah,
so this is something you can ramp into that also provide reach.
Ramp into a Reason Rot's Rage Remains. Everyone loves Reason Rot Rage Remains. I've spec'd heavily on those cards. I have like 7,000 copies. I'm just really hoping that one day I'll get to spike them.
Yeah, I mean, I just think that, like, this is going to kill the majority of things. Like, there aren't very many creatures that people run that don't instantly die to this, and you're probably going to deal at least 3-ish damage on average to your opponent, because if you're killing their best thing, it probably has around 3 toughness. I don't know. A 5-mana 6/6 is also just really good stats. Like, those are not usually get on a Chupacabra.
Yeah. The one other Chupacabra that I think competes with this is LVS Sealed / Primordial All-Star Nova Heart Guardian. And I think this is generally better.
I kind of like Nova Heart Guardian.
I may be playing both of them in one of my Gladiator decks.
Yeah, I mean, I could easily see that.
Yeah, this is just a generically strong pushed card, but in a very fun way. I think encouraging
very good with
Vaporized. This is one of the most gruel creatures I've ever seen. I'm not gonna lie.
What?
This is one of the most gruel creatures I've ever seen.
Oh yeah, and I think that's a good thing.
It's very simple in what it does, and it does it very, very, very well.
Yeah, I think I like that with the Scions. With this, we're getting to the point where like dumb mid-range decks are now like more possible than ever. Because I remember like it was a while ago, but like I remember like a year and a half ago, like MSEM was in a spot where like people were feeling actively frustrated with playing with like the viability of mid-range, and I think we've gotten to the point where mid-range is not only viable, you have a variety of options too, and I think that's really cool.
I will say that I think in most cases the deaths of mid-range and aggro were greatly exaggerated. I think a lot of people had unreasonable expectations for what those decks were going to look like, and were just trying to force those same style decks over and over again. But I think it is true that mid-range is starting to change into being something more that closely resembles standard mid-range, or like the mid-range decks people are familiar with, which is just a bunch of efficiently static creatures that all 2-for-1 things. But I definitely don't think MSEM as a format like a year ago was a place where you could not play mid-range. Just you couldn't play decks that wanted to just completely control the board, and that's all they cared about.
Yeah. That makes sense.
Yeah, fair.
I'm really hyped about this next card, actually. So, Adarna the Everforge. I don't know how to use this card, but I'm really excited that she exists. So she's a 5-mana Planeswalker with 5-star loyalty. Her +2 is you may discard a card. If you do, draw 2 cards. So it is card advantage on a plus. It's also card filtering, and it puts things in your graveyard to immediately use with her -3, which is a kind of Goryo's Vengeance-like ability. You reanimate a creature, it gains haste, and bounces to your hand at the beginning of the next end step. And then her -7 is discard your hand, then draw 7 cards. And then you can reanimate her, or put a copy of her from your graveyard or your hand onto the battlefield. Notably, she's able to -7 the turn after you play her, because you +2, you untap, you -7 her. Then she comes back and you +2 her again. So once you've +2'd Adarna once, you can wheel every single turn for the rest of the game until you get bored.
Yeah.
She
That,
is kind of ludicrous.
I mean, I think it's really cool. She's kind of a split card in that she either does the tormenting voice and then wheel every turn, or she's kind of a strange like through the breach variant.
Yeah.
And I think either of those, either of those are fine cards. I'm just curious, like what Shell actually wants.
Yeah.
Maybe
I
like a
think,
Jund version of Chief Striking Dawn, because I mean,
yep.
because if you're ditching 7 cards a turn, suddenly like your chief is growing very big, and then you can start reanimating from there, or just stuff like that.
Yeah, you already play big scary things to reanimate. Honestly, mid-range checks, like, she's kind of Mookeef on crack. And the downside is she's a 5-drop when Mookeef is a 3-drop. But the upside is she's just way better than Mookeef in every single possible way. So
Does,
if you're the sort
does
of
this card,
Mhm.
sorry, I was just gonna say, does this card make Ominous Heart viable at all?
I think Ominous Heart was already an acceptable card. I think this card makes
Yeah,
Ominous Heart scarier. Um,
yeah.
I mean, honestly, I'm just looking at her directly next to this Earthbreaker Behemoth and being like, hey, do you know what's a good thing to repeatedly, like, reanimate, then discard, then reanimate, then discard?
Yeah.
Give it haste.
Hmm.
Really crunch in there.
I love it.
Um,
Yeah. I mean,
I
I gotta say, I actually did not think this card was MTM playable, but I think you kind of told me.
Yeah, and I'm glad because I have no idea what to do with this card. Just like vague ideas of, yeah, this seems broken. Here's a couple broken things I
I
can
mean,
do,
yeah, like
and
it's a
then I'm just
5 mana planeswalker that pluses up to 7, draws you a card, and then can make you wheel every turn. It's so weirdly positioned, but it's so obviously efficient and good.
yeah. And I really appreciate when I get people who are very good at brewing decks to like look at a card and say, okay, no, I can do something with that because then I don't have to do any of the legwork. Let's
Okay,
talk about
I'll see what I can do. Yeah, let's go.
Yeah,
Imperial Reverence is banned for an enchantment. Permanents your opponent's control enter the battlefield tapped. Whenever a permanent enters the battlefield tapped and under your control, untap it. Cycling 2. This card is very weird. Yes, you can do Amulet of Vigor combo-y stuff with it, but at 3 mana, no, you can't. We already have Pinnacle of Vigor. I think where this card shines is in decks and matchups where you care about the first mode. The fact that cycling helps its floor a bit, but it's an interesting design. I just don't think it's that nuts.
How much does Shutdown burn if you ramp it out with the Mana Dork?
Not.
yeah, no, I think that this is. I'm interested in this card as like a one of or so in like Legend Weaving, if there's like if there's some application for the permanent enters the battlefield tapped on untap it thing, because I think the making your permanents your opponent's control enter tapped, it's just a really powerful effect sometimes that you can just if you can like tutor this out, and
I
like
mean,
It puts them a mana behind every turn.
yeah, and I think
Yeah, I mean-
like the reason I specify as a one of is I think that you generally would want this against decks which are like threatening you with hasty threats basically, or like if stuff like the Fire Shaper Adept combo becomes more around, I suppose. I think having this as a Legend Weaving target is pretty
I think
reasonable.
it's worse than Embodiment of Order, which was in Simon's sideboard in Team Unified, which is 1 white enchantment. Creatures in non-basic lands your opponent's control enter the battlefield tapped, and you can also morph it. And if you unmorph it, it's a 4/4 in addition to those effects.
That's fair.
So
Okay, yeah. Okay,
2
yeah,
mana
that's fair.
versus 3 mana is a huge deal when you're talking Legend Weaving, and I think hitting creatures and non-basics does like
Yeah, that
70
covers the
of what you want.
gamut. That's fair. Okay.
The fact that this screws over fetch lands as aggressively as it does is kind of sweet. In a way that Embodiment of Order only half does. But I think this card is a cool design, but something I would be surprised to see get there.
Yeah,
That's fair. I think a card that you guys wouldn't be surprised to see get there is Entrail Elemental. So
Yeah,
you want to talk about that?
Yeah, so this card I think is one of the best unearthed targets in the format. Um, if you torment land this on turn 1, all of a sudden you've got a 3/3 menace. If you happen to mill another creature in Oracle's Vision, you can hit them, cast your Unearth again, and get back that creature. Say, I don't know, or recurring abomination, something else, and all these kind of things. Like, I just think this plays into a lot of different synergies that already. Um, and even if you are casting this fairly some amount of the time, like yes, dice removal is a thing, but if they don't kill it, you're threatening an extra spell every turn, which like Dreadhorde.
Yeah,
I think this is kind of similar.
there are legitimate calls that I don't disagree with to ban Dreadhorde Arcanist in Legacy. The fact that this doesn't cheat on mana undermines a pretty key part of Dreadhorde Arcanist, which is just
Mhm.
the sheer tempo efficiency. But it's insanely more, you know, it's much more multiversal. You
Yeah,
can
it can cast creatures. It can cast any instant or
planeswalkers.
sorcery. Yeah.
Like that's the thing is you are not locked into one specific type. If your instant or sorcery somehow like exiles itself to other effects, um, or like if we ever had adventure creatures, this now
Oh
does
my
actual nuts things.
god.
Yeah, this card is actually very real. The main thing that I think is a hoop for it is figuring out the correct shell for it. Um, but I would agree that it probably involves Unearth.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Sweet.
Okay, the next up is a card that I'm a big fan of. It's Esper Command, another one of the command cycle. Um, and it's basically two Esper, and then you choose two. You get exile target spell, getting around can't be countered if that's relevant. Scry two, then draw a card. Return target artifact creature from your graveyard to the battlefield, or destroy target non-artifact creature. So very powerful control, but also very expensive at 5 mana. And I think the interesting thing is, I think this was like pegged by I think like Reddit or like most people as like one of the most powerful or like most powerful command, but we were actually like or Pip was on the verge of cutting it from this list. I am a big fanboy of this card, so I wanted to discuss it. I also didn't want to break up the command cycle. Um, but I think in general, the main thing that you want to be getting out of this is you need to be using that third mode. Otherwise, I don't think that you want to be running this card. Is where I'm at.
Yeah, so funny enough, this is actually one of my spoiler cards for Alara. So I wrote up a big thing about how much I love clunky 5-drop counter magic, because I really, really do. But it's so hard to justify this card if you think that the most likely modes are mode 1 plus mode 2, because in that case, why aren't you just playing
Mhm.
Unraveling? Or something like, sometimes you'll get lucky in mode 1, mode 4 them, but like, even then it's kind of sketch. Like, you're probably better off just playing Crystal Wave. I think where this card, exactly as Kay said, you need to be playing this card for the ability to mode 3. Um, like, just straight up. If you can build a control deck that wants to sometimes, at instant speed, reanimate artifacts, while also having it be a flexible answer, this card's great. You should slam it. My main issue is it's a very clunky card, and I think that's a very hard circumstance slash deck to engineer.
Yeah, I'm not super high on this for MSEM. I do want to say that I think Mako really nailed. This feels like such an Esper card to me. I think out of all the commands, this one like most screams like what the shard is. I don't
Hmm. And next up, we have another powerful command, Grixis command. So I think since Dodger's been talking or like been excited about all the Grixis cards, I think I want to give this to
Okay,
you. Also
sweet.
because I want to laugh because this is a Grixis card that isn't an unearthable creature. Take that.
So Grixis command is uh 4 mana. The options are target is a creature, 3 damage to a player planeswalker and you gain 3 life. Return a spell to its owner's hand, or return a monocolored instant or sorcery card from your graveyard to your hand. So the reason it's monocolored is so you can't loop 2 Grixis commands. Um, I think in general the base food is usually going to be Edict plus either Remand or Return a card, both of which are fine. I'm not super high on this to be honest. I think like Grixis deck, you probably have access to more efficient counterspells and removal. But I don't usually play the kind of decks that this card wants to go in, so I'll defer to Pip's judgment. I think.
Yeah, I think this card is really awkward because I think edicts are in a bad place in this format unless they cost 1 mana. Because the decks that are vulnerable to edicts have learned to put multiple creatures on the board at once. And the fact that this has only 2 modes that actually allow it to be a 2-for-1. So it's only a 2-for-1 if you have Edict plus recur monocolored instant or sorcery. Is a little bit rough. The other modes are fine, but you only really want to be returning spells to their owner's hands if you're a tempo deck, because it's a very small window to interact. And that's kind of where the second ability wants to go as well. Like, you need to be in a deck that cares about reach. 4 mana is a good cost for a command. Like, that vastly increases the chance of this getting there. But just the type of deck that this wants to go in is one that I'm deeply unconvinced exists.
I think the thing is just like most of the time, if you're planning on using this for the last two modes or like something to that effect, Mariner skill exists, and I think that is it's not better, but I think it's just one of those cards where like being one mana cheaper and being blue, it just kind of
Yeah, I'm on record as saying I think Mariner's skill is like usually kind of awful. Um, I think this card is really hard to say whether it's actually better because I can think of arguments for it, but I just don't know how likely those are. And the fact that I'm struggling to justify it over a card that I've said in the past is kind of a trap is not not the most encouraging.
yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
I think it's interesting, but I think it's kind of personally. Um, like I'm not super excited to put this in my decks, but I think that like I wouldn't be surprised if there were some decks where this card is actually something you want because maybe you do actually care about mode, and maybe then that changes to a point where edicts are better again.
Okay. For a
Yeah,
card that
it's
people, oh sorry, go ahead.
oh yeah, sorry. I was going to do a similar segue, which is I'm usually high on cards that are just generically good. I don't think Grixis Command is as generically good as it looks. However, Hellion Devastator is actually just a grotesque card, and it is a miracle we did not make it cost more than 4 mana.
Oh yeah, this card is.
Remember when this card also had haste?
I do remember this.
I think this is like more than anything else what decks your like classic modern Jund decks to actually
Yep.
be competitive in this format. Like it checks off all really nice. It provides a very reasonably costed body. It takes care of almost anything, or like within reason. And then if it's ever somehow a bad draw, you can just like play.
Yeah, it's so good. I think that like the one thing that might make people might make this like slightly worse is because there's been like the pit built wave which has been pushing CMCs higher, but also like you can't just if you're in a deck that wants to commit to the board, you can't not play in the first 3 turns. So it's like sure the CMCs are moving up, but also like people are gonna have to play curves, dog, and this will eat up people playing on the curve. It's just a fun, good card.
I really love that it's currently seeing play in Cyber's 5-color tap-out control deck. I think that card's incredibly real there. I think the stupidest part of this card is cycling. When the fuck are you ever cycling this card? What are you doing with your life? Just cast it.
You're probably
I don't know,
cycling it when you're like, if your opponent has a Scion on board, and you're like, well, fuck, I need like actual removal. And if I
Well,
play,
4/3 is gonna stop a Scion for a turn, at least. It'll
I
kill
mean,
the
like
random idiot.
sometimes you have to keep in hands, and then like maybe you really want to make sure you hit your third land. Like I think
Don't
that's
don't keep those. No, stop it.
sometimes you have to if you mulligan to 6 or 5 or whatever, like that. Sometimes you
Don't
have
keep this in your hand if you're mulliganing that low.
to.
but yeah, I think the
I mean,
cycling is in 99% of cases not going to be relevant, but it adds percentage points to this card when in the situations where it is.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so a card that I've played against in an MS, or I've not played against, but I've spectated an MSEDH game night with, and I'm kind of a big fan of, is Janara Virtue of Band. Basically, she allows you to activate tap abilities of your creatures twice, because she allows you to activate them the first time without actually paying their tap cost. And she also basically gives them pseudo haste to activate their tap abilities. So, lots of cool little nifty things you can do with this in MSEDH. I'm not sure about MSEM, so I want to hear what you guys think about that.
I think the only circumstance where this card is good enough in MSEM is a circumstance where you play it and you win immediately that turn. That sounds kind of insane, but I think it. Okay, so
Yeah, it's just like why
the
play this
second.
over a Scion?
there is actually a good reason, which is that second ability applies per instance of Janara.
Huh.
What that means is
Oh,
if
so
you
you're saying
have
Kiki
Did you blink
combo?
her?
if you have a creature that fast flickers her, you can keep doing things.
So
Okay.
I think another reason to play Janara as well is actually Angel Caller. People have been
Oh, sure.
very into Angel Caller decks. You can Angel Caller, generate 3 mana, immediately cast Janara, and then you can play Caller's ability again for free if you have a in your hand.
Yeah, and that's that is a powerful turn 3 play.
Yeah.
It's a little bit synergy heavy for my taste.
Yeah,
but
those 2 cards do not a deck make, but
yeah,
if you have a deck with those 2 cards in it, that does enable some powerful things.
yeah, and I think if you find a way to make this card card can be powerful, but I think your deck needs to basically be built to abuse Janara, and then you need to always be able to find Janara, and I think that's a little bit of a rough sell.
Yeah.
And I guess if you are running all these mana dorks like, not Green Sun, fuck, what is her Green Sun called?
Back in the wild.
Thank you.
Oh yeah, it seems like a pretty reasonable back end of the wild target. Like maybe. I mean, so like this is also supposed to work with encourage creatures, because you can kind of like double up the encourages.
That's
if you're
that's
running
definitely
Hierarch
too cute for
Ranger,
this format.
it is too
Yeah.
cute.
So
But
basically, I think
that
the consensus is just play this in MSEDH. She's really sick. She's really sick in MSEDH. And MSEM, if you can find a quick combo with her, cool. If not, stay away.
Yeah.
So next up, we have another one of the command cycle. Of course, we're back to generic value. So the first one is a non-dragon wipe for 3 damage, then 4 damage to face, destroying a planeswalker, and then milling 5 cards and then putting a permanent from among the milled cards into your hand.
I'm gonna be honest, this is not the best command-esque card we've gotten in Jund this cycle. I think Epic of Anku is just this card but good. Because I think it is so... I never want to play a 5-mana board wipe that only answers 3 toughness creatures. There's no world in which I want to do that. And if I'm playing a deck that wants those types of sweepers, I don't want 4 damage to each opponent. Like, this card is so hard to engineer. This card is harder than Grixis Command to engineer circumstances where you're a deck that wants more than one of these modes, and just so many combinations of the modes are insanely inefficient. Like, 5 mana for 4 damage to each opponent, and you get to impulse from the top 5 cards of your deck for a permanent. That's not playable. I don't know.
Yeah, it's in an
I'm
unfortunate
very
spot.
low on this card.
Yeah, I think that
And that's
The-
also
the-
okay.
the one place I can see it is maybe in Chief Striking Dawn because of the mill 5 return a permanent.
No,
But
you
like
have
yeah,
better
no,
things
no,
to
yeah,
do in that
I
deck.
know. I just
You
again
have
that's
2 mana mill 5s.
I know,
Like,
I know. It's
this card, Wealth the Underbrush, makes that 4th mode just look actually unplayable because it
Yeah.
can only grab permanent cards from among the milled cards instead of Wealth the Underbrush grabbing literally anything.
Yeah, that's fair. Okay, never mind. We'll wrap it up here, folks.
Alright, Kalia's Abomination, however, this card is sick.
Oh wait, are we not talking about Kalia herself?
Sorry, I have it sorted by number order rather than anything that you've done. So since she's a buy box promo, she wasn't on my list.
Yeah, she
Let's
is.
talk about Kalia.
Yeah, there. Just to be very clear, we're not. No one is selling actual block boxes of the set. There's no sale of custom Magic cards. This is it's buy a box.
Mako says they will not send you a box of Alara if you send them $100. I got scammed. Don't do it.
Yeah, but basically it's just buy a box in name only. So.
Yeah. It's buy a box partially because Mako didn't want to have a Mardu card in the actual set, is my understanding.
Yeah, I wanted to
Which
stick to
I
the
respect.
actual color distribution of the shards.
Yeah.
So
Anyway, she's a 5 mana 4/4 flying lifelink, and she has an attack trigger. Her attack trigger is only good if you have an angel, a demon, and a dragon.
So you basically need polyp pools. You need polyp pools.
Yeah, like this card does not exist unless you have polyp pools, and it does pretty stupid things if you have polyp pools out. I'll give it that.
Yeah,
But
you swing for 12. Don't mind if I do.
I will say that this card denied me my 5-0 run.
Play better decks.
I was playing Black White Unearthed. I just
If it can't beat
See,
Kalia Polyp Pools, I don't think it's good
See,
enough. I'm sorry.
your mistake
the
was
poor
not
guy,
playing. You
like-
were not playing Grixis Unearth, as we've seen. That's a mistake punishable by death. So
look, they played it. I had 2 Pith Bolts in hand. What do you want me to do?
play removal that isn't Pithwell. Journey's End was just buffed. Play that.
I mean, if you
I am
play
playing
like
Journey.
if you play 2 more colors, then Pitbull can hit this. Like,
Yeah. So you
Forehead.
just play greenless Unearth. But yeah, I think the thing is like the Scions and stuff generally provide more value, and this, yeah, it needs the Polyp pools to work. I think it can be fun if you do get the Polyp pools, but otherwise, give this a pass. Is my gut feeling.
I think the other kind of just fundamental issue is it's very. I'm a big proponent of this, and Dodger and I disagree fundamentally. But I think when your 5-drops require a large amount of synergy to work, the payoff needs to be absolutely ludicrous. And the fact that you need to be able to play this 5-drop, it doesn't really do anything while it's just sitting there on board, and then you need to at least for being a 5-drop, and then you need to swing with it, and you've warped your mana base around it. You're running Polyp Pools, like you've made a non-zero amount of sacrifices. It does a lot when you do that. It can kill a bunch of creatures or it can deal damage to face. But it doesn't literally say on it, win the game, so I'm low on it. Like,
I mean, I don't. That's the reverse card.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, the 5-drops I generally tend to run are stuff like Seeker of New Horizons, which does absolutely win you the game.
Yeah. Okay,
I
so
was
next up,
saying-
speaking about 5-drops that generate Mondo value.
I'm much higher on this card because guess what? It says enters the battlefield on it, and that's how you can tell it's a good card in 2020.
Creatures are
4/4.
actually spells, baby.
It's a 4/4 flying for 5, but when it enters battlefield or dies, it casts a slightly smaller Blightning. I'm slightly bothered by the fact that Mako didn't make this literally Blightning, but I guess 3 damage would have been too far. Or maybe the aesthetics of 2/2/2 is what he was going for. Anyway, Kalia's Abomination is great because it just immediately lands and it's a 3-for-1. And if somehow your opponent kills it, guess what? They take more damage and discard 2 more cards. So by the time this has entered and then left the battlefield, your opponent is completely out of gas. They have used everything they had to answer this card and then lost more from that point. That's what you want out of your 5-drops. If this enters the battlefield and immediately dies, you're okay with that. That's a winning move for you. It's also a zombie demon dragon, and that's a cool ass type line.
Yeah, this card fucks.
very
I
metal.
kind of want to get this out and then, like, I don't know, like, sack it on my or draw step or something like that. Like, that feels like gas. You can just absolutely murk them even if they have 3 cards in hand.
There's something that then makes me curious, like, do we have any cards that allow us to, like, basically graveyard flicker a creature, like sacrifice to them and return it from the graveyard to the battlefield?
You can Adarna this, right?
There's
Oh,
the
Jesus
one
Christ,
from
you can
Skyrim.
Adarna this.
It won't
There's the one from
die.
Skyrim.
Yeah.
You can I'm trying to think. Well, actually, Cloudscape is a card, but I can't give any.
Yeah, we'd have to look up if there was like sacrifice and then return to the battlefield.
Dodger, you get 1 Cloudscape shill per episode. You sure
Okay,
you want to use it here?
This seems like a fun place to use it.
Yeah,
I mean, yeah, it's a creature with flying. It's where else? Okay.
Yeah, I mean, I'm pretty sure there are probably ways to do that in MSEM too. I feel like there's gotta be.
Okay,
But
so we have a
Adarna is
card.
probably a good place to start.
We have a card from Ophorio, which is how you know something really good is about to happen. Called Destiny Forgotten, which is 2 and a black instant. As an additional cost to cast a spell, sacrifice a creature. Choose a creature card in your graveyard. If its power is greater than the sacrificed creature's power, return it into put it into your hand. Otherwise, return it to the battlefield.
Wait.
Yeah, okay, so because it's the same, because it's the same power you return to the battlefield.
Yeah, so it's 2 and a black instant. Flicker something through by sacrificing it.
So if your opponent has 5 cards in hand, you can play this. Get rid of 2 of their cards on their next upkeep.
On their draw step. They drop to 4 cards. Boom, those are all gone. Also, they've taken 6 damage.
What is this card called?
Destiny Forgotten. And of course it was from Ophorio. Where else would it be from?
Yeah, thank you, Cajun. Very cool.
All right.
So there's Kedrickit Deep Dweller. So whenever you cast an instant or sorcery, it gains your choice of Indestructible, Lifelink, or Menace. And whenever it deals damage to a player, you draw a card and that player discards a card. So just a very, like a general, efficient, aggressive beater for spell style decks or like tempo style decks. The problem is the cost. It is 4 mana. So it's a little bit high on the curve, and the only way to natural, like, it doesn't have natural protection unless you like,
Okay, wait.
unless you
Before
cast
we
a
talk
spell
about the
heal.
card at all, I want to share a story. Okay, so my story is I'm commentating Blue Eclipse and Psychonaifu. Blue Eclipse is running 4 Cataract Deep Dweller in his deck. Blue's resolves Cataract Deep Dweller, protects it from removal, connects it, right? Passes the turn. I'm commentating. I'm like, hello, draw a card, discard a card. Neither player noticed the trigger. Not even the player who the card deck is 4 of. So this happens for 2 more turns. 2 more Cataract Deep Dweller triggers are missed. The game ends. Blue. What this tells me is that Cataract Deep Dweller does not need the second ability to be good. Clearly.
It might also tell us that whatever Psychonaifu was playing was not well
hey, that was
equipped.
the green-black chili deck. We talked about that.
That deck seems
They,
fine.
It does rely on Pithwilt a lot. And
Yeah.
this thing has the magic factor of being a 4-mana 4/4, which basically makes it immortal.
it also literally can gain indestructible. So it's like I like this. I like that we are getting to the point where we have lots of threats that are like, fuck you, Pithwilt. How dare you?
I also think that this is generally a sweet card for, if other formats start popping up where you need to start kind of dipping into the deep well of like, okay, what other options do I have in terms of threats? Whether those are singleton formats or team unifieds or other things, this card's great because it's not something most decks want to run, but it's something that is absolutely absurd if your deck is catered towards it.
It's a
Playing
very
it and
standard card to some degree.
yeah, this card would be nuts in most standards. Like playing this and then holding up 1 mana like for an opt, and your opponent can't interact with it, and then you untap and you give it Menace, and now you're up 2 cards, and also if you decide to lifelink, the aggro deck basically loses on the spot. It just does so much. It is a Swiss Army claw. Yeah.
I think that all 3 modes are definitely relevant. The Menace helps you get in to get the Super Spectre effect. Will obviously removal, and then being able to gain life is also very, situations where you want it. If you're playing against Burn or.
I mean, it's what makes Snow Mom good is sometimes you want life gain, and when life gain comes attached to a 4/4, that's when you're happiest.
Yeah, so I think like this is honestly a really nice control win con. I think from watching Blues deck, I played against it twice in League, and then I also watched Blues. And I think this card is a deal. I good in every meta, but I feel like Blues has got a pretty solid shell around it. I don't know if I heard 4 copies in the main, but I think it's a good card.
I'm a little sus of it as a control win con in this format just because we have so many goddamn good options, but I'll defer to the judgment.
There's a lot more space opening up.
All right, so let's talk about Kess the Necromaster. I don't think this card is there for MSEM, but it's also a very sick design for MSEDH, and just it really epitomizes one of the interesting parts of Grixis, where you're like a spell slinger deck that also is doing things with creatures. So it's a 6-drop 3/5 flying death touch, and whenever you cast instant or sorcery spell, reanimate a creature from your graveyard. This deck kind of built itself. You put in some number of cheat C targets, you put in some number of backup reanimation spells, ways to fill up your graveyard, bunch of cheap instants of sorceries, some ramp, you're good.
Yeah, I think one of the main reasons that this card was on this list is mainly because it's one of Mako's favorite cards. I think it's, if I remember correctly, it's their favorite card from the set. So definitely just wanted to give a shout out for that before we move on. Okay, so next up we're going to get to our second of the 3 5-color busted cards. This one is Maelstrom Elemental. It's a 7/7 with haste, and it basically grants every spell that you have Cascade except you draw a card. No, sorry, not Cascade. Abound, but except you draw a card first.
So Notably, it's cards you spent mana to cast. One thing that's mildly awkward about that is it means this card doesn't have the directest of synergies with World Heart Elemental or World Heart Avatar, the Wooburg discount one we were talking about earlier. But it also means your opponent is foolish enough to play out like a tall Locust Sentinel or whatnot. Anything that makes your spells cost 1 more to cast. That additional cost is applied after you've reduced the card to 0 mana, which means now you have to spend mana to cast the spell, which means this will proc again. So it does really stupid things in that regard. And also the fill case is it's a Wooburg 7/7 haste. And it turns out when your fill case is that good, you can get really, really, really far with a card like this. This card is my pick for... It's possible this is only the second best Wooburg card in this set, but I think that's a legitimate argument. And that's kind of insane given how good this card is.
I was about to say it's kind of insane given how good the other card is, but I guess we'll discuss that when we get there.
Yep.
Yeah, I think I was playing games with Egg last night, and to turn 3 World Heart Avatar into this on turn 4. I died in very short order.
I'm shocked.
Obviously, that's not going to happen every game, but I think that like if this, well, first of all, it having haste means that you don't actually have to untap with it to get value out of it. Like if you end that attack for 7 damage, like you're okay with that in your most spell afterwards. Then if it does, like just the sheer amount of value you're able to get with this in like a cascadey, aboundy way, makes me very high on this as a payoff for those black color monstrosity decks.
Yep. So the next card is a card that I think is just a little bit hard to find a slot for, but Marin Bane of Cairns is a pretty ludicrous card when you're looking at it. So Jund colors, 4/4, can't be countered. Great start. Above curve stats, hard to fight on the stack. The fact that it can't be countered is kind of relevant because it's a 3-drop, but whenever she attacks, exile target creature card from your graveyard. You may cast that card for as long as it remains exiled by sacrificing a creature in addition to paying its other costs. This means that it's not quite reanimating as hard as Chi Li, but it's doing so faster. If you have ways of creating tokens or other disposable creatures, you can really start generating real card advantage.
It is more likely to survive combat than Chi Li, like.
But it is a 3-drop. I think it's great if you're playing it on turn 2 off a Mana Dork. I think this is a card that would fairly solidly define its standard if it was in one. But
it kind of reminds me of Anafenza the Foremost.
Yeah, it has big Anafenza energy.
I actually think this is the card that I want to Unearth Shell.
I feel like this is what we're gonna. It's the new paired pools. Every time there's a 3-drop creature, we're gonna have to hear about Unearth.
I think it's probably worth. I think this versus Entrail Elemental is a legitimate discussion. And I'm not sure which comes out on top. But
I also think this might want to go in like a Bloodbraid Ritualist deck.
Sure.
Like these cards might want to go in the same deck. Although Blood getting rid of creatures in your graveyard permanently is kind of sad.
I think generally what you'd want to do is you'd want to, at that point you want to use a sacrifice mode. So you're looping a creature with Marin plus Bloodbraid, and you're drawing a card each time and redoing ETBs and dice triggers.
So I know we didn't talk about this card, but I actually think Valid Cultivate is a card from this set that I think is actually very good. And could go in that kind of style of deck too, because it fills your graveyard, gets you value.
It's also a 1/1 for 1 that is not super impressive, so I'm not as high on it.
Well, it's a 1/1 like anyway.
One last thing I guess before we move on to the next card is I think that this is actually a 4-power 3-drop, which is slightly relevant because I had a kind of fair Zera deck, which was looking to play out like a mid-range game plan, but also could just oopsie into Zera comboing you to death. The big, I guess, like bottleneck for that deck is that we didn't really have that many great 3-mana 4-drops. But I think that now with Marin, like Marin is just a really good fair card, and also the ability to just enable that zero combo line, I think is really strong. So I want to kind of revisit that in Jund colors instead of Sultai, and see how that goes.
So next up we have the last of our commands, correct? Second to last of our commands?
Last
I think
one,
it's
yeah.
I believe it's
Last of our commands. Alright, so Dodger, sell us on this cultivate.
Okay, so I was obviously a lot higher on this card when it was an explosive vegetation.
Yeah,
Because it was the
same.
best explosive vegetation ever.
Yeah, by a lot.
So cultivate. So Nine Command has 4 modes. One of them is obviously cultivate. Another one is put 3 counters on target creature for +1/+1. Another one is have a creature you control fight another creature you control. I believe, another creature you don't control. I believe that was also a nerf. It used to be just a Rabid Bite.
I'm not sure, but I believe that.
I think
It was a Rabid Bite, yes.
Gotcha.
And the last mode is you gain life. So obviously I talked about the bad news first. This card is a lot better. The other bad news, it's Naya. Naya colors are probably the worst color combination you can, because blue and black have card draw, and you usually want card draw. I think that it's still good, and I think that it could enable a ramp shell, because I think 4 mana for cultivate plus one of these other modes is still reasonable for running big creatures. Like 4 mana creature cultivate is pretty good. The fact that this can also be a massive combat trick, so like you give creature +3/+3 and then also like kill something else, is like mode. The incidental life gain is nice too, because like life gain is obviously not good. Incidental life gain attached to cards that you already want to play is very valuable. So all in all, I don't think this card is a slam dunk. I thought the old version was definitely a slam dunk, but I think that I would like to try it. I don't want to deck with it, and I haven't played it yet, so I'm not sold on it yet.
I think so. Thing to keep in mind is I was really hyping up Harrow last review. I think this card is. It's really hard to compare this card to Harrow because of the obvious deck building restrictions that this one has.
Yeah.
But I think
Also
if you were
being
playing
ramp on
a
4 versus ramp on 3.
right, although most of the Harrow decks are trying to go late anyways. So it's one of those cases where it's like, well, this technically puts you up on cards, whereas Harrow's just card even. This gains you life. If you're in a blacklist control list, I think you have to start looking at this card before Harrow, but it's close.
Yeah.
But I think this is just a card that you should keep in mind if you are playing kind of these late gamey engine decks that also want the other modes.
I don't think I want to run this in a deck that doesn't run creatures that you can have out when you cast this on turn 4, though.
Interesting.
I'm not very interested in 4 mana cultivate game 5 on turn 4.
Yes.
Being instant is the relevant part.
Right, that's the thing, is I would never want to tap out on turn 4 for that, but I would be more than happy to hold up a bant command, and if I don't need to bant command, Naya command.
Or like,
that sounds like good,
or like,
good
or like you have a counter spell plus, and then if they don't need to do anything, you just Naya command. You get some more lands. Oops, I'm building up to a bigger Markarth Assailant. Like if you're, yeah, that is actually factually a deck I'm building right now.
I guess for me, I would rather go, be a turn 3, like some kind of turn 3 haymaker, or like maybe play a splitting bloom, and then turn 4, or sorry, like go like splitting bloom, turn 3 Naya command, maybe buff my splitting bloom up. I don't know, and then at that point, like I have a board presence. Like I'd rather use this to do something proactive. But I think it could make sense in those kind of decks too, because 5 life is not a small amount.
That's basically 2 bolts.
Yeah, and 5 life does go a long way towards out, like
just stabilizing.
Yeah, it kind of does a bit of the tempo loss that you've done by spending 4 mana on a cultivate. So I guess I could kind of see it. I think you guys convinced me.
So the next card we're going to talk about is a card that I think has the potential to do some really gross things in MSEDH, but I'm not going to talk about that. I just want to talk about it in MSEM, which is Orlesia, First of the Sen. For Esper, it's a 1/3.
Calling her Fist of the Sen wouldn't be too far off, because it feels like a gut punch every time you see an opponent resolve this.
Yeah. So 1/3 artifact creature. So this is very vulnerable to basically every single removal spell under the sun. You can burn it. You can, pith wilt it. It's an artifact, so you can nature's claim it, whatever. But notably, your opponent can't do that when she resolves because your opponents can't cast spells during your turn. And you can play lands and cast spells from off the top of your opponent's library during your turn. You also get to look at their top card because otherwise, what's even the point? The thing that makes this card so good to me is you're not playing this on turn 3. You want to play this turn 5-ish when you can almost certainly get value off of the top cards of your opponent's library. We have so many good 5-color lands that you don't even need to rely on hitting your opponent's land drops in order to cast their spells. I'm not going to say that knowing the top card of your library is valuable information, but it certainly means that you can prepare slightly, where you can choose, well, I'm not going to cast the top card of your library because I'm okay with you having it, and I'll save my mana for interacting instead, and then just steal their bomb on the untap. I think this goes great into some kind of 4 or 5 color mid-range piles that are interested in playing to the board while also kind of maintaining a stranglehold on their opponent's resources and how they interact. This being a kind of fixed 3 mana Teferi is a very powerful effect and one you should keep an eye on, because control decks being able, or mid-range decks being able to just say, cool, I don't need to worry about what you're doing on my turn, but I can still do things on your turn, is just so obscene, especially when it comes in with free card advantage built in.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I think I'm a
it's a
little
nutty
more on
card.
it than you are, but I could definitely see it showing up.
If we I think someone has mentioned we have all the pieces except an ensnaring bridge for lantern control. So if someone finds out adequately how to deal with opposing opposing board presence in a way that makes lantern control ideal, then suddenly this becomes far better.
Gonna disagree there because you don't want your lantern control pieces to die to bolt.
That's fair, sure.
Next up is another 3-color legend, Rafik the Magnanimous. I think this card's most...
Sorry.
Oh, that's how you pronounce it. God damn it. I just learned that earlier today. Someone on a TV show used that word. I was like, ah. Anyway, I assume this is a MSCDH card, but does anyone think otherwise? Because I'm interested.
I think the last ability is potentially interesting. It's also it's a fairly big beater. But yeah, I could see this in some sort of mid-rangey deck that uses equipment. But yeah, I think the problem is we just don't have a deck like that. This would be real nice because of the double strike with Staff of Tranquility, I think is the name. Or Staff of Equilibrium. But yeah, I don't know. Being a 3-drop is a real downside, and but I don't know. But it's in this weird space where I could see it being played, being built around, but I don't know.
Okay, so I think the best line to do with this is actually just to ramp it out on turn 2 with Hierarch Ranger. Hierarch Ranger buffing it, you got a 3/4 lifelink double strike attacking in, drawing you cards, starting turn 3.
Yep. No, that seems good.
Yeah.
Besides that, I'm not really sure what deck it goes into. I actually want to build deck this card now. I haven't really noticed it until now, but yeah.
All right, let's get to... I think we're in the final stretch. No, not quite.
We're pretty close.
We're close.
Maybe
we have 8
10 cards.
Yeah, we have 10 or 11 cards left.
Fortunately, I think lots of these cards are fairly quick talks. I think that Sharum Archmagocrat should be reasonably quick.
Hey,
Yeah,
it's a second sunrise. It's a second sunrise on a legendary creature, so you can play it as your commander, or you could just play it fairly, I guess. But why would you?
You definitely want to be doing some degenerate stuff with this. And this used to go infinite with a sack outlet. It no longer goes infinite with a sack outlet.
Yeah. Wait, is this the first second sunrise effect that we have in MSEM?
No, I believe we have had other ones.
Okay.
Yeah, this is just the one that comes on a commander. Before. But yeah, I think this set offers so many goodies for MSEDH that I'm really hoping that y'all out there brew up some decks and hit up the channel. It's a really...
Oh, yeah, I mean, if you want me, I'll hop in. I just feel like other people would probably rather play than me. So
Oh no, this is why you host your own MSCDH
actually,
pods.
I should probably be doing that. Yeah.
Yeah. But before you do
One,
that,
but I kinda forgot
I think you'll want to talk about this next card because not to stereotype you once more, but I think it is very much up your alley.
Yeah, well, I mean, I made a deck with this card, which is my Survivor ramp deck. This, I still think this might have been okay at 4 mana, but I think most people
I do not want to
disagree.
live in a world where someone can go
no,
mana,
absolutely not.
where someone can go Mana Dork on 1, Lone Survivor on 2, and Summit Guardian on 3, and then have the biggest creatures on the board while also locking out any non-creature spell decks. No thanks.
Yeah, your 4-drop, your 1 mana non-creature spell is now a 4-drop. You probably haven't gotten your 4th land yet, but don't worry, I only have a 5/4 Vigilance Reach and a 5/4. 5/5?
Yeah,
Like,
yeah.
5/5.
no, there's and we're not even
I can think it without it being correct. We'll just say
Okay.
that.
Okay.
Yeah, and I can understand that it's correct. Or sorry, that it's incorrect. But I think that this card is still very good. Or at least decent. If you do resolve this off of the back of like a turn 1 dork and turn 2 dork, this is going to prevent your opponent from playing most of their spells.
Yep.
And the fact that it has cycling is also nice because like this card is not always what you want to be doing with your opening hand. Like maybe you just didn't draw a ramp, like a ramp creature, and you need to, try to cycle into a lone survivor on turn 3, whatever else. And I think that like the cycling is nice to have. I think not having trample is kind of sad because this does get blanked by random 1/1s and stuff. And reach feels kind of irrelevant, but like you mostly care about second ability anyway. I think it's a neat look.
This is just like honestly, if this same set didn't have Earthbreaker Behemoth, I think it would be pretty easy to call this as the best mid-range 5-drop in the set. But Earthbreaker Behemoth kind of swoops
Also
that
a
away.
messed up card.
Yeah. Okay, speaking.
This is a card, by the way, where I think you can cycle it. Like 5-drop starts to get into the territory where I think the cycling mode on this is kind of real.
Well,
Especially
then some matchups is also just not that good.
Yeah. Well, I mean, there's not a lot of matchups where the 5/4 Vigilance Reach part isn't that good. I guess
Well,
the
you're playing
matchups where you can't get
like
to
a
5
creature
mana.
aggro deck.
Yeah. A very fast aggro deck, this looks stupid.
Okay. So next up, a card that definitely doesn't look stupid against fast aggro. It's Tendril Snare. So it's a sorcery speed 2-mana removal spell, so not super efficient. But it's exile removal that also ramps both you and your opponent, but presumably you're using this in a deck where you can better use that mana than an opponent can.
I think this used to be an instant before it was nerfed after the set was accepted into the format. I think if it was an instant, this card would see a ton of play because
This would be an instant staple, yeah.
An instant staple, but
God damn it, Kyle.
Yeah. And I think there are still a lot of good ways to use this. I think this is another draw for me for potentially expanding Wanderfall to Naya. Because having access to removal that also enables your implant is really nice. Like if you're Wanderfall, you don't give a shit if you're playing extra land. Like you are going to get way more use out of that extra land than your opponent. And being able to main board removal for that is nice. As that any deck really wants this, I'd say.
I think Cyber's playing it in their tap out control deck in this GP. I think this card is very powerful in control, especially in control decks where you know that your 4-drop is going to be scarier than their 4-drop. That's not a guarantee. I think this is a card that, kind of like Trottery Restoration, requires you really know the meta and know how greedy your deck is, and make sure it's greedy enough. The fact it has to tag a creature an opponent controls means that you can't ever, fail case ramp with this. But I think this card is really going to shine in, as you were describing, decks that don't want to interact, but that realistically need to interact, and that just go way over the top.
Can I point out one more silly thing?
Mm-hmm.
This card can actually steal Plasma Addict because it will get countered after you get Plasma Addict.
Yep, countered on Isolation.
Oh, that's actually that's kind of nasty. Okay.
Although usually the Plasmatic will be tapped, and Burn will say, "All right, kill you on turn 3."
Understandable. Have a nice day.
Um,
A card that will get nowhere near to turn 3 kills. This is one of the biggest, most expensive boys in the set, but for good reason. It's Tharsis Tyrant Scion. 7 mana for an 8/8 with flying, but at the beginning of combat on your turn, you can gain control of up to one target creature an opponent controls, untap it, give it 4/4 flying and haste, and you sacrifice it, so they don't never get it back. So I think the main thing of this card is I don't know how playable it is in MSEM, given that we have better cheat out targets, even in the set, which we're going to be talking about soon. But I think for MSEDH, where like the ramp suite and like the speed of the format is just very different, I could definitely see this being played as like just kind of like a big top end fuck you. I'm the jundiest deck on the block type commander.
Sweet for EDH.
yeah,
For
this is
sure.
a card that's a little bit awkward because it's unfortunately not our best cheat out dragon, which feels ridiculous to say. We do have a card that cheats out dragons in particular. And this card's really good if you're playing against creature decks and you're on that deck. But in most cases, Shimmering Dragon is just the best cheat out target for dragons. This card's close. It's not bad.
I can
but
see
Immortalizing
this being in a
Stone?
sideboard of that kind of deck. Because there are
Yeah.
some decks, maybe if they have some really big threats.
Oh, Immortalizing Stone is actually a decent suggestion for it, just because
yeah,
then it's just every turn they sacrifice a creature and you get to
you
dome
get
it.
to.
Yeah,
Yeah.
you can lock out some decks like that. So that's a fair suggestion.
Yeah, I think that's probably one of the best places for it. I'm still not super convinced, but definitely more convinced. So Threnex Spore Mother is one that's on the list because I think it's there. So it's a 3-mana 3/3. Whenever a non-token creature you control dies or a creature card is exiled from your graveyard, you get a 1/1 green sapling creature token. This is redundancy for a card that's already kind of nuts in our format called Young Necromancer. It procs when it dies, so you obviously get to replace it when your opponent kills it. If your opponent wipes your board, you replace large chunks of your board. It does really dumb things with Sacrificial Bowl, allowing you to turn creatures you already, used up into more 1/1s. Or if you are doing dumb things with Bloodbraid Cultist, or that's definitely Ritualist, as we were discussing. Like, I think this card does a lot of neat things fairly well, adding important redundancy to decks that don't have it. And it's a 3/3 for 3, so like you could do worse.
Yeah, I'm just a little suspicious of its base body / base case, but I think the comparison to Young Necro sells me on it a little bit more.
I like this with the Bloodbraid Ritualist because that means you get another body to sack next turn. So it kind of means your consuming gets double paid for. But maybe this card is not good enough in the vacuum to run the same deck. I don't know.
All right.
Okay. Oh, you want to go? You want to go for this one, Pip?
Sure. So you ever see those cards and you're like, oh my god, they're selling packs for EDH players again. Timus is one of those cards. It's a 5-drop 4/3 with first strike and Naya. But if you ever untap with it in a game of Commander, which, by the way, don't ever let the Timus player untap with their Commander, you cast a single Raise the Alarm, now you have 6/6 stats on board.
Unfortunately, many of the Magic players on the r/custom Magic subreddit find it impossible to play removal, so they think that this is one of the most broken cards ever printed. But
okay, yeah, no, if you can't play
Was it
removal,
12/12 if you played Raise the Alarm?
yeah, sorry, I did my math wrong. Yeah, this is 12/12 if you cast Raise the Alarm. That's fine. Seems balanced.
yeah,
Give creatures that enter like some kind of haste. Do some dumb things and you kill people. It's simple math. You just do things and you kill people.
quick muffs. But yeah, and I honestly I think that you could probably I don't think this is a good deck in MSEM, but I think it's probably you could with some luck do well. You could kind of just do the all cats plan. Have this plus Salem Inserto plus Sigura Tam plus whatever other cats you want, and you just you instantly have a Naya Cats deck that also has this really punishing tokens aggro game plan.
I like this with Splitting Bloom.
I think this is really funny with Salem and Certo because you're like, the flavor of Salem's minus is you're creating, Salem as a legendary creature. He's popping off and he's like, kicking people's asses, and instead Timus just turns him into 3 cats.
I just like that, like he just like opens the trench coat and he's like, "You're not. Hold on, you're not Salem."
Also funny with Tam, it's like make 3 cats. No, make three cats.
You don't want to use this with Tam because the tokens don't have haste, and then they are still exiled at the end of turn.
Wait,
So,
really?
Would not recommend that.
Oh, I didn't know that. That actually, that's so lame.
I do think it's funny that a couple things. One, this card's name is Timus, and it's like the tiniest commander I've ever seen. Also, just like I don't know how well you guys know Lyco Drake, but like as soon as I saw this card, I was like,
Yeah, this is such a Lyco card. Lyco is on the next MSEDH game night and is going to be playing this. Very excited for that.
Lyco has been talking excitedly about this card, as far as I can tell, since it entered the set. And just as it has approached the format closer and closer, the volume has increased, and it's heartwarming.
Yeah, I'm very happy that like, because I think that like lots of times MSEM is a very competitive format, and I think that pushes out some cards and strategies. But I think that like now that we're getting to the size where we can support like EDH formats and stuff like that, we're getting to a point where more and more of the cards in MSEM are relevant, and I think that's a really cool place to be.
Yeah, I mean,
Absolutely.
if you don't get killed on turn 5 in EDH, blues.
Okay, this is the next thing is a card that is, you know how earlier we said that like there's a debate over whether or not Maelstrom, whatever, is the best 5-color card in the set. I want to make an argument for Velar the Sunderer, because
Oh boy.
it's 7 mana. It's Wooburg, but holy cannoli, 8 starting loyalty +2 destroy up to 1 target monocolored permanent, and that's the weakest ability. -3 create an 8/8 elemental creature token that's all colors, flying, first strike, vigilance, trample, lifelink. Literally, the only thing it's missing is haste. And the -5 is the real kicker. You draw 3 cards, and you get to free cast a spell. So you can immediately get back your bang for buck value on this, and I think that's the main reason that this card is powerful, mostly as a cheat out target with stuff like Answer Midnight's Call, etc. Because you can cheat this out, immediately gas back up, and then cheat out something else, and then just kind of go for broke from there.
I think that this is a card that's very, very powerful in a lot of very obvious ways. I think it's also a card that's going to be incredibly skill testing, because you look at this card and you're like, holy shit, those are so many powerful abilities. It's like, no, there's a single ability here. If you do anything other than -5 when you play this card, you are playing this card wrong. I don't think there's unless you have built your deck incredibly weirdly.
I think there's justifications for if you're like, let's say you're playing this versus you're playing like this as a cheat out deck versus an aggressive matchup, you can -3 safely there.
I mean, yeah, but then what if they do anything to interact with that and then just kill you around it? Like, or you could -5 and hope to draw into one of your big other dumb idiots.
Sure, I guess so. I don't. It depends on what dumb idiots you're running. But I'm thinking of like versus burn. What are they gonna do? Cry, piss their pants? Like, okay.
If it's post board, bounce it.
I mean, they could burn you.
Yeah.
But like.
Yeah, but I still think that like there are acceptable situations to play the -3 is what I'm thinking.
But the minus dies to Pithwelt. How are you justifying it? You fool.
Oh yeah, dies to Pithwelt forehead. But yeah, the -5 is just the strongest ability in the most situations.
Yeah, and it's also one of those things like that. This is the first Planeswalker that we've seen that really justifies all of those cheat out spells, because, you know, even Azimir, who's a very powerful Planeswalker to cheat out, if you just minus and then someone cleans him up, you're not behind by any means, but you've put in a lot of effort for just what was kind of a really fancy removal spell. Whereas there's no circumstance in which you play Valier and you're not like just launching yourself miles ahead.
This card is so good that we let Mako get away with using more Bacher art.
Yeah, it's very true. So our last multicolored card, which, if I'm being honest, is a bit of an anticlimax after Velar the Sunderer, is Visitarium Smuggler, who's blue-black for a 2/3, so, you know, solid baseline stats.
Yeah, blue-black 2/3 at the beginning of your upkeep, draw a card. I think that's pretty good.
Yeah, if you run the artifact density necessary to make this hit every single turn, you've cheated realistically. But this card's nuts. It is drawing
You
card
can get
every.
reasonably there by using stuff like Brine Fleet Bay plus the rail lines. But yeah, you're not going to be
If
hitting
it,
this every draw
Sage's
step.
Ashes.
if you get this to every other turn, I think this card is quite good, but won't break anything. Sage's Ashes might uptick that slightly, but then you're playing Sage's Ashes, and I think that's
Yeah,
generally a
I think the
bad
problem is like
decision.
right now our artifact decks are much more like linear slash fast than I think that this would have a slot
Right, you
for.
want to like grind someone out with this
Yeah,
card.
like if we could have a format where like this plus Wonderkind devising or something, I'm just spitballing. Obviously, Wonderkind
Yeah,
devising itself reduces the density, but like more some of our slower, more like grindy artifact payoffs, then yeah, this is a very powerful card.
I mean, I think like if you're playing an aggressive deck, the fact that this can keep you fueled while also coming down for two and attacking for two, like I
Yeah,
think
I
that
think
makes it
like
still
I
worth
guess
it.
like in Blues' deck, which is like it's an aggro deck, but it's also slow. I could see this.
Just run a ton of artifacts though, I think is the problem.
Yeah, it's
Like it has
fair.
like a reasonable amount, but it's not like as well. And I think if I were gonna
So
run
more
this
like
card,
artifact tuned version of that.
yeah, I would be running like 4x Tidehall Lich, 4x Ostracizer Orb. Um, just like I would be going more all in on the artifact strategies themselves. I think this card is really good as a home. Rail lines make this a lot easier to fit in. I kind of want to see if you put this in a monument shell with majority artifact creatures because you have stuff like Abrogator and Tempered Anculum. I think that would be an interesting avenue to explore.
Yeah, it's also got the Granny cost and type line. New Granny, Blue Granny.
yes,
Yeah,
because Granny wasn't blue.
Okay. Magic color versus face color.
Um, Rings of New Alara is a very powerful 2-mana rock, but I think it's only particularly nuts in the only format that matters, MSEDH.
of course.
Um, this card is no Arcane Signet, since it's, you know, frequently is going to struggle to be on in the very early turns of the game, but once you hit the kind of mid game, this card's on, it's fixing all your colors, and it's great. Enters
Like
untapped.
I think you can have this on by like turn 2 or 3, like if you're playing a decent density, like like if you
If you're
pith
playing a
with
decent density of stuff that can like mill, you probably want to already be in a commander that can take advantage of that. Otherwise, it
yeah,
isn't generically good.
or just
Yeah,
like playing an early pith wilt or blood frenzy or
but then you're not playing it on like having it on turn 2 is pointless unless you're playing it turn 2. So
Yeah,
we're now talking about activating it on turn 3, which is fine, to be clear, but I think in MSEM, this card does not exist. In MSEDH, this card's fine, especially because you don't need to be going, like, immediately. You just need to be getting there at a reasonable pace.
hmm
Yeah.
Okay, and I think with that we're done with the non-land cards, and we have two sets of land cards to
Alright.
talk about.
Hopefully.
So a home stretch here. The first of these is I don't know how you guys define these. I like to call them the check duels, or like the
middle lands because
mid.
like they're based around
Yeah,
Nope, Trilands are already a thing.
center land,
We'll come up with
centrist
something.
land.
we'll come up with something. But basically, they're untyped dual lands that enter the battlefield tapped unless you control essentially the excluded basic from their shard. So essentially, you have a blue green which requires a plains, black white which requires an island, blue red which requires a swamp, black green which requires a mountain, and red white which requires a forest. Um, so our format's mana bases are already kind of schnasty, and I think this just goes further to help with the even greedier decks of the format. Essentially, not being typed
Yeah,
is a big boon though, or
I
big boon
forget.
for the format balance, I suppose.
I forget. Did the wedge versions of these get added to the
Correct.
land
Yeah,
thing?
they're in the bundle.
I guess the main issue with these, so when these were fetchable, I think they were instantly the most powerful fetch lands in the format, or fetchable lands in the format, just because they don't check, basic mountain or whatever.
Yeah.
I think as is, fetch lands are just kind of broken. and I think very few of these are better than just.
Can we get
playing
that on
fetch
record? Pip said that the fetch lands are broken.
You can hear me repeat that every time. I will say that about every single format ever, including ours. Fetch lands
Word.
break everything.
Fetchlands
Word.
ban 2021.
I think that where these are good specifically is in decks that are base one color and try and flash two.
Mhm.
I was testing for the Naya deck. That deck is very base green. It really only wants to run red and white for a couple cards, like Lone Survivor and Earthbreaker Behemoth in particular. That deck performance you want to have like mostly base forest mana base. So most of the time you're going to be leading with forests on one of the first two turns, which makes cover heights a very easy way to immediately hit both of the other two colors without like having to work that much for it. So I think I'm running 3 cloud cover heights in that list, just as like most of the time it's just going to be like unfetchable plateau, which I think like does get there. So I think that they're very situational lands, but I don't think they're useless. And I think that there are plenty of like if you're running a deck that for some reason is base one color, like overwhelmingly base one color, and then wants to splash a couple other colors, you should really keep these on your mind. They are useful in some cases.
Sorry, go ahead.
No, you go ahead.
I was gonna say I think it's kind of nice / poetic that we end off on this card because I think
It is very pretty.
It's very pretty. It represents kind of like one of the climactic lore moments, and mechanically, it's very Alara. It's
And the flavor.
kaleidoscope. Yeah. So
Kaleidoscape.
My mistake. Yeah. So it's a land which adds 1 mana of any color, but you can only spend this mana to cast spells with 3 or more colors. So basically, if you're part of any of the shards, you'll get the boon, but otherwise, no dice.
So you missed actually a really important part of this card, which is going to sound,
the fact that you can
like
also add
point.
colorless, and so it's not dead. Yeah.
Yes. So that's what pushes this card into there will be a shell for this eventually. This card was originally a strictly better Golden Glade, or not strictly better, but close to better. If you know the history behind that card, it's got reworked for a reason. This current version doesn't currently do too many nice things. You can cast Pithwilt off of it, you can cast 5 color cards off it, you can cast all your commands off it, all the push 3 and 4 drops in the set, but end of the day, it's really hard to make a deck that is running a high enough density of those cards without just requiring you to bend yourself in all of these different ways to otherwise support them, because you only get 4 copies of Kaleidoscape. With that said, as density increases, if you ever become able to play a deck that is Grixis and is just running like a density of, let's say, 12 to 14 powerful 3 color cards, this card should go way up on your priority list. And I think the card's pretty sweet.
I think it should also let me activate abilities so I could use this with Markarth Assailant.
I mean, you can use the first ability for Markarth Assailant.
You know what I mean, to fix for Markarth Assailant ability. Because I feel like
once you're in a situation where you're activating Markarth Assailant, your bottleneck should not be, do I have rug mana?
You don't know my life. But yeah,
if that is your life, I criticize your life, and I will not stop criticizing it.
Okay.
Right?
And I think that brings us to the end of our review. But before we go, there's going to be 2 things we're going to do. And the first of those is, let's just do a speed round. Each of us mention our favorite card that we discussed today. We'll start with Kevin, Dodger, Pip, me.
Oh boy.
Okay. So I'm just going to take this from whoever's after me, but Unearth. I have been trying since the release of earlier this year to get Champion of Destinies to be a good card, and this might be it. It might be a vanity. There's better things to do with it, but goddamn, Unearth is going to make for some amazing decks.
I actually was including Champion of Destinies in my GP deck. I didn't quite get there, but I was thinking about it. Okay, Kevin's full line. Let's see, what's another card I really like in this set? I think honestly, Hellion Devastator is just such a like I've been a green red mage for I think that like it's always nice when Jund is viable. I feel like Jund has been like Jund in the classical sense has been a bit it's been a curve in terms of like what else you do in MSEM for a while, but I'm very interested in what Eggs Jund deck does in this GP, and I'm considering seeing if I can try to run some of that similar Jund energy at some point because I do really love just playing some good efficient removal when I'm not doing stupid things with parapools.
It's really hard for me to pick like a specific card in this set that I love because so much loving the overall flavor or loving specific combinations of cards. Based on this kind of whole night, I think Angel of Sucor went from being a card that I was like kind of whatever on to like the more I think about it, the more hype I am about it. So I think that would be my pick. There's just it it allows you to do this kind of draw go style deck that also plays to the battlefield that I inherently love.
Okay, I
Yeah,
definitely should
thoughts,
not. I
Kyle?
definitely should not set myself last because at first I was laughing at Dodger like, haha, your card got stolen, and then Pip does it to me.
Oh no.
What's this bullshit? No, but it's actually fine because I have lots of cards I love from the set, and I think it would be kind of wild to not talk about Esper Command as mine because I literally had to. I executive decisioned this back onto the list, and it's just I love running. Like I think I've run a lot of decks, but like everyone knows that like control combo is my favorite archetype, preferably in like blue black X, and it's just such a clean card. Such and like one like important thing about like stuff that I want to do in control decks is I want to be able to answer everything. So like and that'll lead to me like playing like less than efficient cards like Esper Command. So it's very much like it's a very me card, and all around. So I appreciate it a lot. Okay, and I think the last thing I'm going to do is just I'm going to quickly put up the Alara GP stats. Um, and I think with that, I think that's the last thing we need to talk about. So, are there any things that you guys see here that seem particularly interesting or noteworthy?
I feel like
Dodger has an obligation that the MSC server is roiling with his absence, so I think for their sake, I'm gonna say we don't need to delve into another extended conversation.
That's fair. That's fair. Okay, I'm just going to quickly point out Spine Break because what the hell is that doing there? But everything else here, I think, kind of
I
represents
can explain Spine Break.
the yeah. We'll leave that to people contacting you on the MSEM server then. But generally, these are the cards that have been seeing play in MSEM so in this GP. So definitely go check out the deck list page for Grandpa New Orleans. I'll be putting that in the description.
Yeah. Oh yeah, and before you forget, you asked, and I provide.
Oh yeah,
Excellent.
so true. Okay, thank you guys for joining me to commentate this review. Thanks to everyone who's watching. This is again, I think we keep breaking length records because we are horribly overwinded people, but y'all listen to it, so it's all good.
Gosh dang it, Mako,
This-
why did you have to make such a good set?
This was only 3 hours and 20 minutes. I was prepared for the
Well,
4-hour run, and I was not going to be happy, but I was mentally preparing myself.
Mm-hmm. But yeah, thanks everyone for watching, and with that, we're done with the sets from this entrance period. So it's gonna be interesting to see what set we come up with to talk about next time. But until then, this is Caillou and the rest of the gang, Pipsqueak, Kevin, and Dodger, signing off.
Cloud Skate.